Hey everyone! Welcome back to The Fiction Wizard. Get ready for an amazing tale. Fleur's Veela Queen grandmother detected 56 blocks on Harry. A Triwizard and French ministry demanded trial. Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1, The Weight of 56. The weighing of the wands was supposed to be a formality. That was what Professor McGonagall had told Harry when she handed him the small cream-colored card printed with the time and location. A formality, Potter. Ollivander examines the champion's wands, a photographer takes some pictures, and it's done in an hour. She'd said it the way she said most things to him these days, clipped, efficient, with that particular undertone that meant please, just this once, don't turn it into a catastrophe. Harry had every intention of cooperating with that request. He was, therefore, not responsible for what happened next. The small trophy room off the Great Hall had been set up with more care than a formality deserved. Someone had arranged chairs in a loose semicircle around a central table draped in deep green velvet. Candles floated at precise intervals. A tall window let in the pale October light, which fell across the room at an angle that made everything look slightly more dramatic than it needed to be. Ollivander's battered leather case sat at one end of the table like an old friend pretending not to be important. Cedric was already there when Harry arrived, sitting straight-backed and pleasant, his prefect's ease making the whole thing look natural. He gave Harry a nod that managed to be both friendly and slightly apologetic, the expression of someone who knew he hadn't put Harry's name in the goblet but felt somehow guilty about the whole situation anyway. Harry nodded back. He liked Cedric. That made the tournament genuinely uncomfortable in a way that Crumb's blank stare and Fleur's cool indifference hadn't. Victor Crumb arrived 2 minutes later, hands in his pockets, jaw set, eyes doing that thing where they moved slowly around a room and catalogued everything in it without appearing to. He sat down, folded his arms, and stared at the window like it had personally offended him. Harry got the impression that was just how Crumb looked. Fleur Delacour was last. She swept in with the particular quality of movement that Harry had noticed in her before, not performed, not theatrical, just genuinely, irritatingly graceful, the way some people were good-looking without trying and seemed almost annoyed that everyone kept noticing. She was wearing deep blue robes with silver at the cuffs, her pale hair over one shoulder, and she was talking in rapid French over her shoulder to a woman Harry had not seen before. He looked at the woman, and something in his chest did something odd. She was, old was the wrong word, though she was clearly old. Ancient felt closer, except it didn't carry the right meaning either, because ancient things were crumbling and distant and this woman was neither. She was tall, taller than Fleur by several inches, with silver white hair swept up in an arrangement that managed to look both effortless and precise. Her robes were a deep, burnished gold that caught the candlelight in a way that seemed to generate its own warmth. Her face was, Harry fumbled for the word and landed on carved, because it had the quality of something made deliberately, every line and angle placed with intention. She had Fleur's cheekbones. She had Fleur's eyes, except where Fleur's eyes were blue-gray and sharp, this woman's were the pale silver of a winter sky just before snow, and they held something in them that made Harry think of standing at the edge of a very deep drop and looking down. She was not looking at him yet. She was responding to something Fleur said, one hand touching her granddaughter's arm briefly, and her voice when she spoke was low and carried a resonance that didn't seem proportionate to its volume. The French fell from her lips like water over stones. Fleur had not mentioned a grandmother was coming. Madame Maxime entered behind them both, her enormous frame filling the doorway, and behind her came Dumbledore, Ludo Bagman looking pink and flustered, and a small nervous which Harry didn't recognize who turned out to be the Daily Prophet photographer. She kept squinting at her camera and muttering about the light. Dumbledore's eyes swept the room with that familiar gentle attention that Harry had learned meant he was doing about 6 things at once behind it. They passed over Harry, brief warmth, faint concern, moving on, and then they stopped. Not on Harry. On the old woman. It was a small thing, the stopping. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't watching. But Harry was watching, because the old woman had finally looked at him, and he had the strange sensation of being looked at rather than seen, of someone perceiving something behind or beneath his actual face. Dumbledore's expression didn't change, exactly. It steadied, the way a man steadies himself when he expects the ground to shift. "Seraphine," Dumbledore said. His voice was perfectly pleasant. "Albus." Hers was pleasanter. That was somehow worse. "I wasn't aware you'd be accompanying Fleur to Hogwarts." "No," said Seraphine Beauvais, Grandmere to Fleur Delacour, and Harry would learn within the next 20 minutes that she was also the reigning Veela Queen, the head of the Concealed Door, and the single most powerful Veela-blooded witch alive. "You weren't." She turned back to Harry. He had the distinct impression that everything she'd just said to Dumbledore had been a secondary consideration. A pleasantry. The real conversation was whatever she was doing right now, looking at him with those winter sky eyes from a distance of about 8 feet, her head tilted very slightly to one side. "You are Harry Potter," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Harry said, and then added "ma'am," because something about her made every instinct he had reached for manners he didn't normally use. Something shifted in her expression. It was not pity, exactly. It was too considered for pity. It was the expression of someone who has confirmed a calculation they were hoping was wrong. She said something in French. Soft, under her breath, not to anyone in the room. Fleur's head turned sharply toward her grandmother, and Harry watched something complicated move across Fleur's face, surprise first, then something more guarded, then a look she directed at Harry that was gone before he could read it properly. "Grandmere," Fleur said quietly, in French, the word carrying a note of caution. Seraphine did not respond to the caution. She moved to one of the chairs arranged for the ceremony, sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at Dumbledore again with an expression of complete serenity. Dumbledore looked at her for a moment longer than comfortable. Then he smiled and gestured for everyone to sit. Ollivander was wonderful, as always. Harry had not seen him since Diagon Alley 3 years ago, and the old wandmaker moved through the examination with the same quality of dreaming focus that Harry remembered, picking up each wand, murmuring to himself, running his fingers along the wood with the tenderness of someone handling something alive. He spent the longest time with Harry's wand, holding it up to the candlelight and going quiet in a way that felt more like listening than looking. 10¼ inches, Ollivander murmured, to himself more than anyone. Holly. Phoenix feather. This wand. He paused. This wand has interesting things to say. Like what? Harry asked. Like nothing that belongs in a wand-weighing ceremony. Ollivander set it down, patted it once with 2 fingers, and moved on with the brisk manner of someone who had decided not to start a conversation that couldn't be finished in an hour. Bagman was doing most of the talking, filling silences with cheerful commentary about the tournament and the various champions' prospects, and the prophet photographer was moving around the group with her camera, asking them to turn this way or that way. She asked Harry to stand next to Fleur for one shot, then all 4 champions together, and Harry stood where he was directed and tried to look like someone who'd chosen to be there. Seraphine had not participated in any of this. She sat in her chair with the quality of someone who was watching a stage performance they'd seen before and found moderately interesting. Her eyes moved between Harry and Dumbledore with a regularity that Harry began to notice, like a pendulum. He didn't understand it until she stood up. She did it so smoothly, so without announcement, that half the room didn't register it immediately. She simply rose from her chair and walked toward Harry, and by the time anyone had processed the movement she was standing in front of him, close enough that he had to look up slightly to meet her eyes. "May I?" she said, and held out one hand, palm up. Harry blinked. "May you what?" "Look at you properly." Her voice was calm and entirely serious. "With your permission." He didn't know what that meant. He glanced sideways at Dumbledore, who had gone very still in the manner of someone trying very hard to appear relaxed, and something about that stillness made Harry turn back to Seraphine and say, "Sure." She placed her hand briefly against the side of his face, not his cheek exactly, more the air near it, close enough that he felt a warmth that didn't come from her skin, and then she closed her eyes. The room went quiet. Not the silence of people being polite. The silence of people suddenly uncertain they should be breathing. It lasted perhaps 10 seconds. When Seraphine opened her eyes, the expression on her face had changed so fundamentally that Harry felt something cold move through him. The serenity was gone. What replaced it was controlled, carefully, precisely controlled, but underneath the control was something that in another person might have become shouting. She looked at him for one more second with that contained fury. Then she turned to face the room, and her gaze found Dumbledore, and whatever passed between them in that moment made even Crumb shift in his chair. 56, she said, and her voice carried the peculiar resonance again, except this time it had an edge in it that hadn't been there before. Bagman looked confused. Sorry, 56 what? Blocks, said Seraphine. She did not look away from Dumbledore. 56 distinct magical suppressions, inhibitions, and alterations placed on this boy's core, his memory, his inheritance pathways, and his natural soul connections. She paused. This is what I found when I looked at him properly. The silence that followed that was a different animal entirely. Harry heard it, the words, the numbers, 56, and a part of him knew he should be more shocked than he was. He felt, instead, something that he would examine more carefully later and identify as recognition. The sense of something being named that had always been present but never given words. Seraphine. Dumbledore's voice was careful and quiet. Albus. Hers wasn't. This is perhaps not the, if you say not the time or place, she said, and the gentleness in her tone made it more dangerous than anger. I will find it very difficult to continue treating you with the courtesy your age demands. Madame Maxime had straightened up to her full height, which was considerable, and her expression was no longer the diplomatic neutrality she usually wore. It was something harder. Fleur had moved without appearing to move, angling her body in a way that placed her slightly closer to her grandmother, slightly turned toward Harry, and there was nothing of the cool competitor in her face right now. Her eyes were moving between Harry and Seraphine with an expression Harry couldn't name. Cedric was looking at Harry. So was Crumb. Harry was looking at Seraphine. What does that mean? He said. 56 blocks, what does that actually mean? She turned back to him and her expression shifted, the fury still present but overlaid with something almost gentle, the way you'd look at someone who'd been injured and doesn't know it yet. It means, she said, that you are a fraction of yourself. That what you understand to be your magical ability is what has been permitted to you, not what you possess. It means your memories of certain events have been adjusted. It means your connection to your family's bloodline has been severed at multiple points. She paused. It means someone has been very thorough and very careful and has worked on you over the course of many years. Harry heard her. All of it. He kept his face calm by instinct, the same instinct that got him through 10 years at the Dursleys, and said, Who? That, she said, is the question we intend to answer. We, said Dumbledore. Seraphine turned back to him with that winter sky gaze. The Consile d'Or has already been notified. The French Ministry of Magic formally requests an international audit of this child's magical core, conducted under Veela-mediated diagnostic protocols as recognized by the International Confederation of Wizards Treaty of 1832. She reached into her robes and produced a scroll sealed with deep gold wax. She set it on the green velvet tablecloth with a sound like a gavel. This is a legally binding request, Albus. It is not a conversation. Bagman made a sound like a man who has stepped on something unexpected. Now, hang on, the British Ministry would need to, the British Ministry, Seraphine said, turning that calm gaze on him with the effect of a door closing, is named in the request as a party of interest. The silence after that was the loudest thing Harry had ever heard in a room full of people who weren't shouting. Dumbledore asked for privacy, which Harry thought was a bold request given the circumstances. He got it, partially. Bagman hustled the photographer out, Cedric left with the quiet dignity of someone who understood he was stepping out of something that had nothing to do with him, and Crumb departed with a single unreadable look at Harry that might have contained respect. That left Dumbledore, McGonagall, who had appeared in the doorway like a summoned spectre, Madame Maxime, Fleur, Seraphine, and Harry. And Harry was staying. He crossed his arms and stayed, and when McGonagall opened her mouth he looked at her and she closed it again. "You have concerns about what I've done," Dumbledore said to Seraphine. He had sat back down, his hands folded, his face carrying that particular quality of settled patience that Harry had always found reassuring and now found, for the first time, slightly suspicious. "I understand that. I would ask you, before you take formal action, to allow me to explain. You may explain at the tribunal," Seraphine said. She hadn't sat back down. She was standing with her hands at her sides and her posture had the quality of something architectural. "I am not here to negotiate with you, Albus. We have moved past the point where negotiation was an option." 24 hours, Dumbledore said. "Give me 24 hours the 24 hours in which you would move pieces around the board?" She tilted her head slightly. "I think not. Grandmere." Fleur's voice was careful, and Harry glanced at her. She was watching him, not Dumbledore. Her expression had that complicated layering he'd seen earlier, and she was chewing the inside of her cheek in a way that seemed unconscious. "Perhaps Harry should." "I'm staying," Harry said. Fleur looked at him. Something in her face adjusted. She said quietly. "Of course. Harry." Dumbledore's voice carried that tone, the one that was warm and certain and had always felt, until approximately 5 minutes ago, like the safest sound in the world. "There are things I need to explain to you, and I would very much prefer to do so privately, without, Professor." Harry heard his own voice come out flat and steady, which surprised him. "With respect, someone has put 56 blocks on me. 56. And I'm sitting in a room with the person who apparently found all of them, and the person who apparently has some explaining to do. I think this is exactly the right place for me to be." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. His eyes, usually so warm, were doing something more complicated, searching, assessing, and underneath that, the faintest shadow of something that looked almost like loss. "You are right," he said, at last. "Of course you are right." He set his hands on the table. "Sit down, Harry." "I'm fine standing." A pause. "Yes. I imagine you are." McGonagall made a sound that might have been shock and might have been something else entirely. She moved to stand against the wall with her arms folded, and Harry got the impression she was doing it to have something solid behind her. "The blocks," Dumbledore began, and then stopped. He tried again. "When you were 15 months old, your mother used a sacrificial magic to create the protection that deflected Voldemort's killing curse. That protection was extraordinary. It left a magical signature in your core that was, at that age, already beginning to develop in unusual ways." He paused. "Ways that could not be predicted or controlled. So you blocked them," Harry said. "I made a choice," Dumbledore said, and there was something real in his voice now, not performance, not rhetoric, but the actual weight of a man who has carried a decision for a long time. "A choice I believed served the greater good. A child with an uncontrolled, developing, unprecedented magical inheritance, raised by muggles with no capacity to manage or guide it, so you blocked it," Harry said again. "Some of it, yes." Dumbledore met his eyes. "Not all. Not without reason for each. How many did you place?" Seraphine asked. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. 11. 11, she repeated. She let that sit in the room. "And you know who placed the other 45? "Some of them." "All of them," she said. "You know all of them. Because you allowed it. Because some of them required your cooperation, your timing, your access. She looked at him with something that was neither anger nor contempt but was perhaps more final than either. "You are a remarkably intelligent man, Albus. You knew exactly what was being done to this child, at every stage." The candles crackled. Outside the window, the grounds of Hogwarts were going gold with afternoon light, entirely indifferent to the conversation happening inside. "Who else?" Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. "Harry, who else put blocks on me?" The headmaster's jaw tightened, which was the most human expression Harry had ever seen him make. "Your aunt and uncle's house was reinforced with suppression charms that interacted with your core. The Ministry, several different hands over several different years. There are blocks connected to your scar that Voldemort himself inadvertently," he stopped. "And there are some I did not authorize, that I did not know about initially, that were placed by individuals with their own agendas." The word individual sat there with far too many implications. "Dumbledore," Seraphine said, and his name in her mouth sounded like a sentence being concluded. "I am not your enemy. I am not doing this to harm your plans or your war. I am doing this because what has been done to this child is an atrocity under international magical law, and because my granddaughter," she stopped very briefly, which was the first time she'd stopped mid-sentence since she'd entered the room. "Because I sensed it. And having sensed it, I cannot unsense it. And I will not pretend I didn't." Fleur was very still. Harry looked at her. What did she stop herself from saying? Fleur met his eyes. There was something in them that was unguarded in a way he hadn't expected from her. She was usually all sharp edges and cool air. This was different. "She was going to say," Fleur said carefully, "that my Veela nature responds to magical signatures. That I can sense a person's true magical resonance." A pause. "She was going to say that even through 56 blocks, your magical signature is," she stopped, appeared to make a decision, and finished. "Extraordinaire. And that if she can sense it through that, then what you actually are, fully unblocked." She let it trail off with a small gesture that suggested the rest of the sentence was beyond easy words. Harry looked back at Dumbledore. "When you say the blocks affected my memories, some memories were blurred. Some were," Dumbledore's voice was careful. "Adjusted." "What memories?" "Primarily early childhood. Some from your first 2 years at Hogwarts. Some connected to your parents that I believed would be harmful for you to. You thought losing my parents wasn't harmful enough," Harry said, "and you wanted to protect me from extra harm. By taking the memories that had them in it." "Harry, I'm not angry," Harry said. Which was a lie, but not the way most lies were lies. The anger was there, he could feel it, deep and slow, like something geological, but it was buried under something stranger. Something that felt like the first full breath after a long time breathing shallow. "I just want to understand the scope of it." Seraphine looked at him for a moment with that careful, assessing expression. Then, unexpectedly, she moved to stand beside him rather than in front of him. It was a small shift in position, but it changed the geometry of the room. Suddenly she and Harry were on one side, and Dumbledore was on the other. "The tribunal will convene within the week," she said to Dumbledore. "You will attend. You will answer. You will bring your reasoning and your records and your very best justifications, and they will be examined." She glanced down at Harry. "Anything you experienced, any moment that felt wrong, any gap, anything you remembered and then somehow forgot, write it down. All of it. It will be relevant." Harry nodded. He noticed his hands were steady, which seemed like a minor miracle. Fleur was still looking at him with that unguarded expression. He caught her eye again, and she didn't look away this time. "Does it hurt?" she asked quietly. "What she did, the sensing. Did it hurt you?" "No," Harry said. He thought about it. It felt like someone turning a light on in a room that's been dark a long time. He paused. "Which sounds nice until you realize the room's been dark because someone covered all the windows." Fleur looked at him for another moment. Then she said something very quiet in French, directed at no one in particular, and turned away. He asked her later what it meant. She told him it was an old Veela saying. Something about fire recognizing fire. He found Ron and Hermione in the common room. He sat down between them on the couch by the fire, and for a moment he just sat there while the fire crackled and the common room noise moved around them, second years arguing about something, someone's radio playing from an upper dorm, the comfortable regular sounds of a place that hadn't yet been told it was supposed to be alarmed. How was the wand thing? Ron said. Interesting, Harry said. Hermione looked at him over her book. She had the particular alertness she got when she sensed something important was being understated. How interesting. Harry was quiet for a moment. Fleur's grandmother showed up. Oh, Ron said, with the air of someone filing this away as unremarkable. She's the Veela Queen, Harry continued. Head of the Consile Door, I think. Some kind of governing body. She can sense magical cores. She sensed mine. He paused. She found 56 blocks on it. Hermione's book hit her lap. 56, she started. Blocks. Suppressions. Memory alterations. Inheritance locks. Over the course of, apparently my whole life. Harry looked at the fire. Dumbledore put 11 of them. He told me. The rest were other people, Ministry, the Dursleys' house, some from Voldemort, some from, he said, individuals with their own agendas. He let that phrase sit there. Ron had gone the color of old plaster. Harry, the French Ministry is demanding an international tribunal. Seraphine, Fleur's grandmother, she served them a legally binding request right there in the trophy room. On Dumbledore's table. In front of everyone. He almost smiled. You should have seen his face. Harry, Hermione said, and her voice was the careful one, the one that meant she had 17 things to say and was deciding which order to say them in. This is serious. 56, that's not an accident, that's not one person making one decision. That's a system. Someone built a system around you. I know. And the memories, I know. Harry. She put her hand on his arm. How are you? He thought about the room going dark. About the sensation, 10 seconds with an old woman's hand near his face, of something trying very hard to be seen. I think, he said slowly, I've been asking the wrong questions my whole life. About why things feel wrong. About why I can never quite, he stopped. Tried again. You know how sometimes you read a book and you can tell a page is missing? Not because you know the plot, but because the feel of it is off. Because what's there doesn't quite connect to what comes next. Yeah, Ron said quietly. That's what it's like, Harry said. That's what it's always been like. And I thought that was just grief. Or growing up. Or being an orphan with terrible relatives. He shook his head. It's pages. Someone took pages out. Hermione made a sound that wasn't quite words. But here's the thing, Harry said. He looked up from the fire and there was something in his face that made Ron lean back slightly, not from fear but from the sense of something shifting into place. The pages aren't gone. They're just, somewhere else. And there are people who know how to find them. He paused. And apparently I have an international tribunal to get ready for. Bloody hell, Ron said. Yeah. The fire crackled. From somewhere upstairs came the sound of someone dropping something and swearing. We help, Hermione said. Firm. No caveat. Whatever you need. We help. I know, Harry said. And he did know. That had never been one of the missing pages. Later, much later, when the common room was empty and the fire had burned low, Harry sat alone and pulled out a scrap of parchment. Write it all down, Seraphine had said. Anything that felt wrong. He sat there for a long time with his quill in hand. Then he wrote, at the top of the parchment, one word. Everything. And then he started. He wrote for 3 hours. He wrote about the first time he'd cast accidental magic and then somehow completely forgotten doing it until the second time reminded him. He wrote about the dreams that slipped away at dawn, leaving only the shape of something important. He wrote about the feeling, in his first year, of reaching for a spell and finding it strangely difficult for reasons he couldn't explain, until suddenly it wasn't difficult at all. He wrote about the years at the Dursleys and the times the magic had tried to surface and the way it had felt not like suppression but like suffocation. Like trying to breathe through something thick and close. He filled both sides of the parchment. He found another. He filled that too. By the time he finally stopped and looked up, the fire was almost out and the first grey light of morning was pressing at the window, and Harry Potter had 3 pages of his own story written in his own hand for the first time. He looked at it. Then he folded it carefully, put it in his Gringotts bag with the lock on it, and went to bed. He slept, for the first time in longer than he could properly remember, without a single dream trying to tell him something was wrong. He already knew. Seraphine was in the entrance hall when he came down for breakfast, standing with the morning light coming through the great oak doors behind her, and she was talking to Fleur in the easy, unhurried way of 2 people who have said everything important and are now resting in each other's company. Fleur was in her Beauxbatons robes, hair loose, holding a cup of tea with both hands, and in the morning light with her guard all the way down she looked. Harry stopped himself from finishing that thought and redirected his attention. Seraphine looked up when he came down the stairs as though she'd expected him at precisely this moment. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," Harry said. He looked between her and Fleur. "When does the tribunal happen?" 4 days, Seraphine said. "In Geneva. Neutral ground under ICW jurisdiction." She looked at him with that assessing quality. "You will need to attend. You will need to speak for yourself, no proxy, no representative making arguments on your behalf. The diagnostic ritual will also need to be completed before then, so that the findings can be formally entered." "What's the diagnostic ritual?" Fleur looked at him over her tea. "It is involved," she said carefully. "It will be uncomfortable," Seraphine said, more directly. "It requires opening your core fully and allowing a full reading of everything present. Every block, every alteration, every interference. It will take several hours." She paused. "Some of what surfaces will be difficult. My memories." "Yes." Harry nodded. "When?" Seraphine regarded him for a moment. "You are not going to argue or hesitate?" "No. Most people, told they are about to have their entire magical core excavated, have concerns." "I'm sure they do," Harry said. "My concern is that it hasn't happened yet." Something moved across Seraphine's face, not quite a smile, but the first suggestion of one, the way you see the sun before it actually comes over the horizon. "Tomorrow evening," she said. "I will require a private space. Madame Maxime has offered her carriage." "Fine," Harry said. Fleur was watching him with that expression again, the one he hadn't been able to name yesterday. Standing this close to her in the morning light, with her guard down and her grandmother 3 feet away, he got a better look at it. It wasn't pity. It wasn't attraction, or not only that. It was the expression of someone who has just understood something they should have understood earlier and isn't sure what to do with the understanding now that they have it. "You were not what I expected," Fleur said, apparently to herself. "What did you expect?" She looked at him directly. "Someone smaller," she said. "Which is terrible, because you are not," she gestured vaguely at him, which seemed to indicate that his height was not the point. "I mean in the other sense." "Yeah," Harry said. "I keep being told that." "Non," she said. "That is my point. You should not be used to being told that. You should not be surprised by it. She turned to look out the tall windows at the grounds. Someone worked very hard to make you feel small. Harry looked at the grounds too, the grass silver with dew, the sky the particular pale blue of a cold clear morning. 4 days to Geneva. 1 day to a diagnostic ritual that was apparently going to crack him open and show everything that had been hidden in the dark. He thought about 3 pages of parchment in his Gringotts bag. Yeah, he said. They did. He looked at Fleur. They wasted their time. She looked back at him, and this time the expression on her face resolved into something he could finally read. It was recognition. And underneath it, very quietly, the beginning of something that wasn't competition at all. Chapter 2, What the Fire Remembers. The Beauxbatons carriage was bigger on the inside than it had any right to be. Harry had known this in the abstract. Everyone at Hogwarts had noted the powder blue palace on wheels that had descended from the sky at the start of term, but knowing it abstractly and standing inside it the following evening were different experiences entirely. The main cabin was the size of a comfortable drawing room, with pale gold walls and silk drapes in cream and blue, and it smelled of something warm and herbal that Harry couldn't identify, but that made his shoulders drop about an inch the moment he stepped through the door. Seraphine had arranged the space herself. The furniture had been moved to the edges. In the center of the floor was a pattern that hadn't been there before, drawn in what looked like fine gold dust, a circular design of intersecting lines and curves that Harry didn't recognize from any textbook, but that had the feeling of something very old and very intentional. 4 candles in tall iron holders stood at the cardinal points. The only other light came from the carriage's own soft interior glow. "Take off your shoes," Seraphine said from behind him. Harry took them off. The floor was warm under his socked feet. "And your glasses?" He hesitated. "You won't need your eyes for this," she said, matter of fact, and held out her hand. He took his glasses off and handed them over, and the room went softly blurred, which felt appropriate. He could still see the circle on the floor, the 4 candles, Seraphine's silver-white hair catching the light, and Fleur sitting in a chair against the far wall with her hands in her lap, watching him with that quiet attention she'd been wearing since yesterday morning. "Why is Fleur here?" Harry asked. "Because I asked her to be," Seraphine said simply. During a diagnostic ritual of this depth, the subject should have someone present who anchors them. Someone whose magical signature they have some existing familiarity with. She glanced at her granddaughter briefly. Fleur agreed. Harry looked at Fleur. She met his eyes with a directness that he'd learned was just how she was, no apology, no performance, just the fact of her attention. "Okay," he said. "Sit in the center of the circle," Seraphine said. "Cross-legged. Hands on your knees, palms up." He sat down in the middle of the gold dust pattern. The floor was warmer here, noticeably, as though the design itself was generating heat. He crossed his legs and set his hands on his knees and felt, briefly, ridiculous, a 14-year-old boy in a Beauxbatons carriage sitting in a magic circle in his socks, and then the feeling passed because Seraphine crouched down in front of him and looked at him with those pale eyes and the ridiculousness stopped mattering. "Here is what will happen," she said, with the plain practicality of someone explaining a medical procedure. "I will begin the diagnostic working. It will enter your magical core in layers. The blocks you carry will surface as pressure. Wait. Some will be uncomfortable. Some may be acutely painful, depending on how they were placed. I need you to remain still and allow each one to surface rather than instinctively resisting." What does instinctively resisting look like? Your magic will try to close around the painful ones, the way a hand closes around a wound. If it does that, we cannot read what's inside. She held his eyes. "You will need to stay open." Harry nodded. "The memories that surface," she paused. "Let them come. Do not chase them and do not run from them. Let them pass through. And if it gets bad?" She was quiet for a moment. "Then, Fleur is there. If you need to surface, look at her. Her presence will give you a fixed point. A brief pause. It will not get easier if we stop partway. It will only get easier when it is finished. Right, Harry said. Let's do it then. Seraphine looked at him for just a moment longer, that assessment she did, reading something behind his face, and then she rose and moved to stand behind him, outside the circle's edge. The candles went out. All four, simultaneously, without a breath of air or a word from Seraphine. The carriage's ambient light dimmed. And then Seraphine put both hands on Harry's shoulders, very lightly, and began. The first thing he felt was warmth. It spread from her hands and moved down through him the way heat moves through cold metal, slowly at first, finding the paths of least resistance, and then faster as the paths warmed and opened. It was not unpleasant. It was almost the opposite of unpleasant, actually, because underneath the warmth was something else, something that Harry's mind struggled to find words for, the sensation of being perceived in a way that wasn't intrusive or judging, just thorough. Like someone very carefully taking inventory of a room by touch, in the dark. He heard Seraphine murmuring behind him. The French was too low and too fast to follow, but the rhythm of it was steady and deliberate, with the quality of something recited from deep memory. Then it hit the first block. The warmth ran into something that was not warmth, something hard and cold and precisely placed, like a stone wall in the middle of a warm room, and the contrast was jarring enough that Harry's breath caught. He felt it as pressure against his ribcage, like a hand pressing from the inside, and then it spread upward into his throat and he had a sudden, horrible sensation of not being able to. He breathed. He kept it open. He did not close. Seraphine's murmuring continued, unbroken. The pressure increased, peaked, and then, something gave. Not painfully. More like the give of something that has been held too long, a slow, releasing exhale of tension, and behind it, Harry was 4 years old. He was in the back garden at Privet Drive and his hands were in the dirt and something was happening with the little patch of earth under his palms. It was growing, in a way he didn't have words for yet, the dirt warming and shifting and a single green shoot pushing up between his fingers in about 4 seconds when it should have taken weeks, and he was delighted, purely and completely delighted, laughing out loud. And then Aunt Petunia's voice from the back door and the shoot withered and the warmth in his hands snapped off like a switch, gone. The memory passed through him and was gone. He hadn't known he'd forgotten it. That was the strange part. He hadn't known the memory existed at all until it surfaced, and now it was moving through him and away like a wave, leaving behind only the clear cold fact of its having been real. The second block was deeper. They came in clusters after that, the blocks and the memories interleaved, and Harry stopped trying to organize or categorize them and did what Seraphine had said, let them come, let them pass. Some came quietly. A flash of his mother's face, much clearer than any photograph, laughing at something his father had done. A memory of magic used easily and instinctively and then, immediately after, a sensation of that ease being narrowed, like someone turning down the volume on a song until only the faintest melody remained. Some came with pain. The worst of those was not what he expected. He had braced for Voldemort, for the killing curse, for whatever nightmare might be buried under the scar, and those were there, yes, sharp and ugly, but they passed. The worst one was something quieter. He was 7 years old. He was standing in the corridor outside his classroom at primary school, and he had done something, pulled a book off a high shelf without touching it, he thought, though the memory was still slightly blurred at the edges, and his teacher was kneeling in front of him, and her expression was not afraid, it was interested. She was saying, "How did you do that? Can you do it again?" And there was a bloom of pure uncomplicated joy in his chest because someone was interested, someone was impressed. Someone was looking at him like he was good at something, and then the memory went dark. Not faded. Dark. Like a door closing. And the next thing was, the corridor again, same day, but the teacher's expression was different now. Polite. Distant. Her eyes slid off him in the way adults' eyes had always slid off him at the Dursleys, the way that had always seemed normal. And small Harry had walked back into the classroom and sat down and not understood why the good feeling had gone, or even fully remembered that there had been a good feeling. Someone had gone into that moment and turned the light off. Harry kept himself open, kept his hands flat on his knees, and felt that old bright thing move through him and kept breathing. He heard Fleur shift in her chair across the room. "Look at her," Seraphine's voice said, from 1,000 miles away and directly behind his left ear simultaneously. Harry opened his eyes. He hadn't realized he'd closed them, and the carriage was blurred without his glasses, but Fleur was there, a warm shape in the far chair, close enough that he could see her face, and she was leaning forward with her elbows on her knees, and her expression had nothing cool about it at all. She looked present. Fully, unguardedly present, watching him the way you'd watch someone you were genuinely worried about, not performing concern but carrying it. He held her eyes. Something settled. He closed his eyes again and went back in. The 41st block broke differently from the others. The others had come apart under Seraphine's working like knots being carefully untied, with patience and pressure and the right kind of knowledge. This one was different. This one fought back. It hit Harry first as cold, sudden, invasive cold that started at the base of his skull and moved down his spine like ice water, and then as sound, a high thin ringing at the edge of hearing, and then as the distinct impression that something was pulling in two directions at once, the diagnostic working pressing inward and something in the block pressing out, and the pressure built and built in. He heard Seraphine say something sharp in French that didn't sound like the ritual. "Don't close," she said, switching to English, and her voice had more urgency than anything he'd heard from her yet. This one was placed with a counter-intrusion mechanism. It was designed to be painful to examine. They didn't want this found. "Who's they?" Harry started, and then the block cracked and the pain hit him like a physical blow to the chest and he couldn't finish the sentence. He felt Fleur before he heard her, a warmth that arrived at his right side and resolved into her hand on his arm, her grip steady and strong, and her voice saying something low in French that he thought, through the pain, was probably not ritual and was probably just her talking, just her voice cutting through the noise, and he focused on it the way you'd focus on a lighthouse. The block broke. What surfaced behind it was not a memory. It was more like architecture. The sense of a structure that had been in place so long he'd thought it was just how he was built. A constant low-level dampening of his instincts, his perceptions, the speed at which his magic responded to his intent. Like, Harry groped for the analogy and found it, like wearing a weighted vest so long that when someone finally takes it off you don't know whether you're standing up straight or falling forward. "That one," Seraphine said, and her voice was controlled, but the controlled quality was working harder now, was not placed by Dumbledore. "It has a different signature. Older. More institutional." "The Ministry," Harry said. He didn't know how he knew. He just knew. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I think so." A pause. "They placed it when you were 8 years old. During what I believe was a routine suppression of an accidental magic incident." "The school roof," Harry said. He heard himself say it before he'd consciously retrieved the memory. "I jumped off the bins running from Dudley and he stopped." "You flew," Seraphine said. Not quite gently. Just plainly. Harry was quiet for a moment. "I flew," he agreed. "And someone from the Ministry came to Privet Drive under the cover of a routine accidental magic report, and while they were there, they placed this." Her voice went quieter. "And it was not routine, and it was not accidental, and whoever sent that person knew exactly what they were suppressing." Harry thought about Fudge. About Umbridge. About the entire Ministry of Magic, which had spent the last month calling him a liar in the Daily Prophet and which was apparently named as a party of interest in Seraphine's request for a reason that was now becoming specific and detailed and documentable. He didn't feel afraid of them. He noted that he didn't feel afraid of them, and found it interesting, and moved on. "How many left?" he asked. 15, Seraphine said. "The last 15 are," she paused. "Complex. Some of them are interconnected. Some of them are tied to your scar in ways that require care. We will go slowly. Then let's go slowly, Harry said. I'm not going anywhere. From his right, Fleur made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite not one either. They surfaced 2 hours later. Seraphine ended the working with a word and the candles relit themselves, all 4 at once, and the warmth in the floor faded gradually back to ordinary wood. Harry sat in the circle for a moment without moving, not because he was injured but because the transition from inside to outside required a moment of recalibration, like coming up from deep water. He felt different. Not dramatically, not lightning bolt, fireworks different. More like the way a room feels different when you open a window that's been painted shut for years. The air moved differently. His magic, which had always felt like a river with invisible walls on both sides, felt wider. Still not at its full depth, he somehow knew that. There were still 15 blocks, still the complex interconnected ones near the scar, but wider. Like his own hands were further from his sides than they'd been when he sat down. He picked up his glasses from where Seraphine had set them and put them on. The room went sharp. Fleur was sitting next to him on the floor. She had moved there from the chair at some point during the worst of it and hadn't gone back. She was close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, which was something he filed away for later examination, and she was looking at him with that direct, uncalculating attention. You didn't make a sound, she said. I've had practice, Harry said. That is not something to be proud of, she said, immediately, the way you'd correct something factual. Harry opened his mouth. Closed it. No, he said. You're right. It isn't. She seemed somewhat surprised that he'd agreed. She covered it quickly. How do you feel? He took a genuine inventory. His head was clear. His chest felt open, which was the word that kept presenting itself. He was tired in the specific way of having been through something big, not in the depleted way of having been hurt. Better, he said. Actually better, not polite better. Something relaxed in her shoulders that he hadn't known was tense. What he found, Seraphine said from across the room, she had moved to one of the chairs at the edges and was sitting with a stillness that Harry was starting to recognize as her version of tired, is significant. I have a full record of every block, its type, its approximate date of placement, and where I can determine it, the magical signature of who placed it. She looked at Harry. 11 from Dumbledore, as he said. 14 from the British Ministry, not all from the same hand, but all from the same authorization chain, which means they were sanctioned. 9 from the protections at your aunt's house, which were placed by a wizard, not a muggle, and not without purpose. She paused. 7 tied to Voldemort's interference with your scar, those we left intact today. They require different handling. And the other 15? Some are, she chose her words. Some are from people who should not have had access to you. People whose proximity to you was arranged rather than natural. Harry's mind moved, without him directing it, to the warm figure of Albus Dumbledore arranging pieces on a very long board. You mean people he put in my path? I mean people whose access to your magical core was enabled by your placement in certain environments under certain conditions. She held his eyes. I do not say this to make you distrust everyone around you. I say it so you understand the scope of what will be presented at the tribunal. And the last, Harry counted. That's only 41. What are the other 15? Seraphine was quiet for a moment. The last 15, she said, have no signature I can trace to any living person. Harry waited. They are old, she continued. Older than you, older than your parents. They are woven into your bloodline inheritance pathways, the Peveril line, specifically, and something even older underneath that. They are not blocks in the sense of suppressions placed by an outside agent. They are, she paused, and this was the first time Harry had seen her actually searching for words. Seals. Very old seals on a very old inheritance. I do not know who placed them or when, but they predate the Wizarding War, predate Dumbledore, predate almost anything I have records of. Harry let that sit for a moment. An inheritance, he said slowly. From the Peverils. The Peveril bloodline carries, she paused, deciding how much. There are stories. Old ones. About what the true Peveril heir inherits. The 3 objects, yes, everyone knows those. But the stories say the objects are the smallest part of it. That the real inheritance is something the objects were created to represent. The mastery of death is a metaphor, Harry. For something quite literal that passes through bloodlines and has been, she looked at him steadily. Sleeping. In me. In you. Harry absorbed this with the focused attention of someone who has already had several enormous things dropped on them today and has decided that the only functional response is to keep processing. The tribunal, he said. The 15 we didn't finish today. When do we do those? After the tribunal, Seraphine said. The 7 connected to the scar require, Voldemort's signature is present in those, and we cannot open them without preparation. And the final 8 require a different kind of working, one I will need to research properly before attempting. And between now and Geneva? Between now and Geneva, she said, you will sleep. You will eat. You will sit with what surfaced today and allow yourself to actually, she made a gesture, brief and expressive. Feel it, Harry. All of it. The things you remembered. You were not given the opportunity to grieve them when they were taken. You should take it now, while there is time, rather than carrying it into the tribunal and letting it come out there. Harry nodded. She rose from her chair. You did well tonight. Better than most adults would have done. She said it plainly, without fuss, like stating a fact. Then she moved to the door of the carriage, paused, and looked back. Fleur, make sure he eats something. That kind of working leaves a person, she made the gesture again. Hollow. Then she left, the door of the carriage clicking softly behind her. The carriage was quiet. The candles burned at the 4 points of the circle Harry was still sitting in. The gold dust design was still on the floor but faded now, as though something of it had been used up. Fleur reached into the bag she'd brought and produced, with entirely unnecessary efficiency, 2 chicken sandwiches wrapped in paper and a bottle of pumpkin juice. She held one sandwich out to Harry. He took it. You planned that, he said. Grandmere always forgets that she needs to eat after a working, Fleur said. She says the same thing to everyone else and then does not do it herself. She unwrapped her own sandwich. I brought enough for 3. Does she do this often? Diagnostic rituals of this depth? Fleur considered. None. I have seen her do 3, in my life. The last one, she paused. A friend of hers. A witch who had been cursed by her own family to never access her full power. Grandmere worked for 6 hours. She was quiet for a moment. The witch cried for 3 days afterwards. Not because she was sad. Because she was, finally herself, and the gap between what she'd been and what she was very large. Harry looked at his sandwich. I don't feel like crying, he said. Non, Fleur agreed. You feel like fighting. He looked at her. She met his eyes. I do not say that as criticism, she said. I say it because it is true, and because, she stopped, appeared to make a decision. Because I know what it feels like to be, she touched one finger to the air between them, a tiny precise gesture. Seen as the thing you appear to be rather than the thing you actually are. Harry thought about this. The Veela thing. People see the allure, she said. The surface. And they assume that is all there is. That I am beautiful and therefore shallow. That I am powerful in one way and therefore weak in all others. That I do not have, she gestured at herself, at the space she occupied in the world. Depths. She said the word with a small amount of feeling that she mostly successfully contained. It is very tiring, being underestimated. Yeah, Harry said. It is. They ate in a comfortable silence that surprised him with how comfortable it was. Outside the carriage windows, Hogwarts was dark except for the castle's lit towers, and the grounds were silver-black with moonlight. In the ritual, Fleur said, eventually. When the 41st block, you went very still. Too still. It was bad, Harry said. I know. I could feel it. She seemed slightly annoyed at herself for saying that. Veela sensitivity. I was not trying to, I know, Harry said. I'm not bothered. He looked at the moonlit grounds. Thank you. For moving closer. The anchor thing she mentioned. It helped. Fleur was quiet for a moment. Your magical signature, she said. Even with 41 blocks still in place, it is. She stopped. Started again. When the blocks began to break, the moments when your actual magic was exposed, she shook her head slightly. There are no blocks on that, Harry. Whatever was done to you, however careful they were, they could not touch the core of it. The actual center. She looked at him with something that wasn't quite surprise but was adjacent to it. It is extraordinary. You said that word yesterday. I say it again now because it is still true and possibly more true. She stood, brushing crumbs off her robes with brisk efficiency. You should go sleep. Tomorrow will be, she paused. What's tomorrow? Tomorrow, Fleur said, Grandmere contacts Sirius Black. Harry went very still. You know about Sirius. She knows about Sirius, Fleur corrected. His name appeared in the diagnostic. One of the blocks, one of Dumbledore's 11, was placed specifically to prevent your ability to sense or locate your godfather. To keep your instinct from pulling you toward him. She picked up the bag, folded the sandwich papers with the same precise efficiency. She says your godfather has a right to know what has been done to his ward. Harry was quiet, looking at the moonlit window. Sirius. The block on Sirius. The block that had kept him from what, exactly? He didn't know yet. But the idea of Sirius finding out, the idea of Sirius arriving in the story with full information rather than fragments, he's going to be furious, Harry said. Yes, Fleur said, and for the first time all evening, she smiled. It was brief and bright and entirely without the cool performance of the girl he'd watched walk into the trophy room 2 days ago. I rather think he will be. The next morning came in grey and cold, with the specific bite of Scottish October that never quite gave you enough warning before it hit. Harry had slept deeply, dreamlessly, and woken up feeling a few degrees different from himself, which, he was beginning to understand, actually meant he was a few degrees more himself than he usually was. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dormitory and held out his hand and tried something he hadn't consciously attempted before, just feeling his magic, without directing it anywhere. It was there. Of course it was always there, but now it was, closer to the surface. More responsive. Like a river that has had a dam partly removed, the current stronger and faster than the slow deep push he was used to. He flexed it slightly, just a small pulse, and the curtains on the far side of the dormitory stirred without a wand. He stared at them. He did it again, deliberately, a more directed push, and Dean's alarm clock on the bedside table levitated 6 inches, smooth and easy, and he set it back down and sat there with his hand still outstretched and thought, this is what I am. Not the blunted thing that had been getting through Hogwarts on instinct and grit and luck. This, with 41 blocks removed and 15 still in place. He thought about what this would become when all 56 were gone. He thought about the ministry people who had visited Privet Drive when he was 8 years old, who had found a boy flying on his own and decided the right response was to brick up the window. Ron stumbled out of his curtains at that moment, saw Harry's expression, and stopped. Mate, he said, with the particular caution of someone identifying a weather pattern. "You look different." "I feel different," Harry said. Ron sat on his own bed and looked at Harry with that forthright assessment that was one of the best things about him. "Good different or just different," Harry said. "More." He paused. "I'll explain at breakfast." "It's a long story." "It's always a long story with you," Ron said, but with no complaint in it, only the resigned fondness of 3 years of friendship. Harry was at the door when Ron said, "Harry." He turned. Ron was still on the bed, his expression stripped of the morning vagueness. "Whatever happened in there last night, and you don't have to tell me everything, but whatever it was, you look like," he stopped, trying. "You look like you finally got told something true." Harry held that for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I did." The owl arrived at breakfast. It was not an ordinary owl. It was enormous and dark, with the particular focused energy of a bird that had come a very long distance very fast and intended everyone to know it. It dropped a letter directly in front of Harry's plate with the precision of a delivery that had been aimed, and then landed on the edge of the table and looked at him with an air of "Well, go on then." The letter was sealed with the Black family crest. Harry opened it. "Harry, I've had a letter from a Seraphine Beauvais. I've been staring at it for 4 hours. I'm staring at it right now. I need you to tell me that the things she's written in it are true, because if they are true I am going to need to do something very significant and I would like to be sure before I do. She says 56. She says years. She says Dumbledore knew. Write back immediately. I need to hear it from you. Serious P.S. I'm not angry at you. I'm not angry at you. Whatever I'm about to be angry about, it is not at you. I need you to know that before you read whatever comes next. P.P.S. I'm angry." Harry read it twice. Then he turned it over and wrote on the back with the quill Hermione handed him wordlessly, because she'd been watching his face since the owl arrived and she knew what was needed. He wrote, "It's true. All of it. Come to Geneva in 3 days if you can make it safely. I'll explain everything in person. Harry P.S. I know you're angry. Good." He gave it back to the owl, which took off with the urgency of a bird that had important things to do. Hermione was looking at him. "Serious?" she said. "Serious," Harry confirmed. He's coming," Harry said. He picked up his fork, looked at his breakfast, and found he was genuinely hungry for the first time in longer than he could remember. He ate with an appetite that made Ron look impressed and Hermione look relieved. Across the hall, at the Beauxbatons table, Fleur was sitting with her back to him. But as he watched, she half-turned, not enough to make it obvious, just enough, and their eyes met across the distance, briefly, before she turned back to her own breakfast. 3 days to Geneva. 15 blocks still in place. His name in a goblet of fire that someone had put there on purpose for reasons that had not yet been fully excavated. A Veela Queen with documentation that would make the British ministry's comfortable arrangements deeply, publicly uncomfortable. A godfather 4 hours away from making a decision that was probably going to be loud. Harry Potter ate his breakfast and let the fire in his chest burn the way it wanted to, for the first time in as long as he could remember. It felt, as it turned out, exactly right. Chapter 3, The trial that wasn't supposed to happen. Geneva was cold and clear and smelled of lake water and old stone. The International Confederation of Wizards maintained a building in the old city that didn't appear on any Muggle map, a narrow, 5-story structure wedged between 2 ordinary buildings on a cobblestone street near the cathedral, its facade unremarkable enough that Muggle eyes slid past it without stopping. Inside, it was a different story. The floors were pale marble veined with gold, the ceilings were vaulted and high, and everywhere you looked there were the flags and crests of magical nations that Harry had never learned to identify because nobody had ever thought to teach him that they were relevant to his life. They were relevant to his life. He stood in the entrance hall on a Tuesday morning with Seraphine on his left and Sirius on his right, and the three of them looked at the building and the building looked back with the particular weight of somewhere that had witnessed significant things and intended to witness more. Sirius had arrived in Hogsmeade the previous evening. He'd come as Padfoot, which was the safest way, and Harry had met him at the edge of the village in the early dark, and the moment Sirius shifted back to himself he'd pulled Harry into a hug that was brief and fierce and communicated in about 4 seconds everything the letters hadn't managed to say. Then he'd held Harry at arm's length and looked at him with grey eyes that were doing several things at once, grief and fury and something that was trying very hard to be hope, and said, "Tell me everything." Harry had told him everything. They'd sat on a stone wall in the cold for 2 hours and Harry had talked and Sirius had listened, and the listening had the quality of someone taking inventory of a debt they intended to collect. He'd asked good questions. Sharp ones. The kind that suggested the Sirius Black currently sitting on a Hogsmeade wall was not the half-mad, half-desperate figure Harry had met in the Shrieking Shack last year, but someone coming back to himself, sharpening on the whetstone of specific, documentable, actionable outrage. When Harry was done, Sirius had been quiet for a long time. "Dumbledore," he'd said finally. 11 of them, Harry confirmed. Another silence. "I want to be fair," Sirius had said, with the careful tone of someone applying fairness as an effort of will. "I want to understand his reasoning before he'd stopped. 11, Harry. I know. 11 blocks on my godson. On James's son. And he never, not once," the careful fairness had cracked slightly at the edges. "I would have been there. If I hadn't been in Azkaban. Which I was because," he'd stopped again. "Sirius. I'm fine," Sirius had said, which was clearly untrue and which Harry had let pass. "Are you going to be able to walk into that tribunal without hexing anyone?" Sirius had looked at him with an expression that was, under the circumstances, genuinely funny. "Probably," he'd said. "Probably yes." He had, so far, kept his word. He stood in the ICW entrance hall with his hands in his coat pockets and a jaw set so tight it was doing visible work, but he was upright and calm and beside Harry, and that was what mattered. "The chamber is on the 3rd floor, Seraphine said, looking over the morning briefing she'd been sent. "We have 30 minutes before it convenes. The parties of interest have been notified, the British Ministry representatives are already here." Fudge came himself. "Bold," Sirius said. "Strategic," Seraphine corrected. "He comes himself so he can control the British position directly rather than trusting subordinates to manage it. It is what I would do." She said this without admiration, only recognition. "His deputy, Umbridge, is also present." "Even bolder," Sirius said. "Also strategic," Harry said. Both of them looked at him. "If they stayed away, it would look like guilt," Harry said. "By coming they can frame it as cooperation. As the British Ministry taking the matter seriously and engaging properly with the process." He looked at Seraphine. "That's right, isn't it?" "Yes," she said, with that quality she sometimes had of not being surprised but perhaps revising something. "That is exactly right." Sirius looked at his godson for a moment. "You've been thinking about this?" "I've had 3 days," Harry said. "And Hermione lent me 4 books on international magical law. Did you read them?" 2.5. He shrugged. The other one was very dry. He glanced around the entrance hall. Other people were moving through it, officials in formal robes, several faces he half recognized from pictures in the Prophet, one elderly witch in green who had the air of someone who had been attending proceedings in this building for longer than most nations had existed. "We should go up." The tribunal chamber on the 3rd floor was shaped like a crescent, with tiered seating for observers and representatives on the curved side and a long central table for the presiding judges. There were 7 of them, drawn from different nations, Harry had been told, selected by rotation to ensure no single country dominated. The head of the panel was a broad-shouldered Swiss which named Counselor Brandt, who had the bearing of someone who had presided over significant things and found them manageable. The room was already filling when they arrived. Harry scanned it and catalogued quickly. Fudge in the front row of the British section, his lime-green bowler hat exchanged for formal navy robes, his expression doing the particular political work of projecting calm authority. Umbridge beside him, smaller, toad-like, dressed in an amount of pink that seemed aggressive in the pale marble room, with a smile so fixed it might have been applied with a brush. Percy Weasley 2 seats down, parchment in hand, looking as though he had complicated feelings he was successfully suppressing. Several ministry officials Harry didn't recognize. Dumbledore arrived and sat in the designated witness area with the ease of someone who attended international tribunals regularly and found the setting congenial. He was wearing deep blue robes with a pattern of small silver stars, and his expression was the composed, thoughtful one that Harry was learning to read as the face Dumbledore wore when he was managing several simultaneous problems and preferred that nobody know it. Their eyes met across the chamber. Harry didn't look away. After a moment, Dumbledore inclined his head slightly, not an apology, not a challenge, something more complicated than either. Harry gave him a single nod in return and sat down. Sirius sat on Harry's left with the stillness of someone applying considerable restraint. He had looked at Dumbledore once, briefly, and then looked away, and the looking away had cost him something that showed in the set of his shoulders. Seraphine sat on Harry's right. She was in formal robes today, deep gold again, but more structured, more declarative. She'd arranged her silver-white hair into something architectural. She looked exactly like what she was, the head of an ancient institution coming to make an argument that she considered already won. Fleur was in the observer section with Madame Maxime, close enough that Harry could see her when he glanced sideways. She was watching the chamber fill with those sharp Delacour eyes that missed nothing, and when Harry caught her glance she lifted her chin slightly in a gesture that he was beginning to understand meant "You're fine, keep going." He found it more useful than he would have predicted. Counselor Brandt called the chamber to order at 9 o'clock precisely, and the sound of her gavel was very clean in the pale marble space. This tribunal is convened under Article 34 of the International Confederation of Wizards Charter, governing the rights of magical persons to unrestricted access to their own magical nature and inheritance. Her voice was precise and carried well. The matter before us is a formal complaint filed by the Conseil d'Or of France, supported by a certified diagnostic record of 56 distinct magical suppressions, alterations, and blocks placed upon one Harry James Potter, currently aged 14, British national. She looked around the room. The parties of interest, specifically, representatives of the British Ministry of Magic and certain named individuals, have been formally notified and are present. The complainant is present. The subject of the complaint is present. She paused. We will proceed. She looked at Fudge's section. The British Ministry has requested the opportunity to make an opening statement. Fudge rose with the smoothness of a man who had been making opening statements in formal settings for 30 years. He was good at it, Harry could see that immediately. His voice was measured, his posture authoritative, and his expression carried precisely calibrated concern. Counselor Brandt, esteemed members of the panel. The British Ministry of Magic takes this matter with the utmost seriousness. He let that land. We are, however, compelled to note several significant procedural concerns. The request was filed without prior diplomatic consultation with the British Ministry. The diagnostic procedures employed were conducted by a Veela practitioner, using non-standardized protocols, on a minor who was not accompanied by a ministry-authorized guardian or advocate. He paused. We do not dispute that anomalies may exist in Mr. Potter's magical core. We dispute the characterization of those anomalies, and we dispute the suggestion that any of them were placed with harmful intent. Not harmful intent, Harry said. Every head in the chamber turned. Fudge blinked. Mr. Potter, sorry. Harry was already standing, which he hadn't entirely planned. You said harmful intent, and I think that's the wrong frame. He looked at Counselor Brandt. "May I? I know it's not my turn." Brandt looked at him for a moment with the assessing expression of someone deciding something quickly. "You will have a formal opportunity to speak, Mr. Potter." However, a pause. "Given that you are the subject of this proceeding and not merely a witness, I am inclined to be flexible." Briefly. "Thank you." He looked at Fudge. "You said harmful intent. But the question isn't whether whoever placed these blocks intended harm. It's whether the blocks caused harm. And whether the person they were placed on, me, ever consented to them. Or was even told they existed." He kept his voice even. "I found out about them 4 days ago. From someone who wasn't British." Fudge's expression had not changed. He was too practiced for that. But something behind it had recalculated. "Mr. Potter, we appreciate your passion. However, the complexity of your situation requires—" "What complexity?" Harry said. "There were 56 things placed on my magic without my knowledge. That's not complex. That's very simple." "Harry." Dumbledore's voice, quiet and precise. Harry looked at him. "Let the process work," Dumbledore said. Gently. "You will have your opportunity." "I know," Harry said. "I'm not stopping the process." He sat back down. "I just wanted to establish early that the framing matters." Sirius made a small sound next to him that might have been deeply suppressed pride. Seraphine's face remained perfectly composed, but her eyes, when she glanced at Harry, had something warm in them that she put away quickly. The morning was given over to the formal presentation of Seraphine's diagnostic findings. She presented them the way Harry imagined she'd presented important things all her life, with absolute clarity, zero dramatics, and a detail that was more devastating than any amount of emotional rhetoric could have been. She had charts. She had the full diagnostic record, copied onto enchanted parchment that displayed in the air above the tribunal table when she called it up. She had dates, origins, signatures, and purpose for 41 of the 56 blocks, and for the remaining 15 she had partial records and working hypotheses. She was on her feet for 2 hours. She did not look tired. The ministry representatives made objections periodically, some procedural and some substantive, and Brandt ruled on each one with the brisk efficiency of someone who had prepared for this. Most of the objections were overruled. Harry watched the panel members' faces as the evidence built and saw the way their expressions evolved, not shock, most of them were too experienced for shock, but a quality of increasingly concentrated attention, the look of people for whom the picture was becoming undeniably clear. The moment that changed the room's temperature came just before lunch. Seraphine had been walking through the ministry-placed blocks, each one dated and sourced, when she paused and said, "Block 37. Placed in August of 1984, when the subject was 4 years old, approximately 3 months after Block 36, which you will note was also ministry-placed." She let the timeline sit there. Block 37 targets the subject's ability to perceive and remember instances of accidental magic. Specifically, the block does not prevent accidental magic from occurring, it prevents the child from understanding what he is experiencing. It creates a persistent gap between the event and the memory of the event. She looked at the panel. In practice, what this means is that Harry Potter, from the age of 4, was regularly performing remarkable magic and then being systematically prevented from knowing he had done it. "Why," said one of the panel members, an older man from Japan whose expression had been unreadable until this moment, "would the ministry do this?" Seraphine looked at him. "I would invite the ministry to answer that question directly." Every head turned to the British section. Fudge had conferred quietly with Umbridge and now stood again. The protections placed around Mr. Potter during his childhood were authorized under the Extraordinary Circumstances provision of the 1981 Magical Persons Act, a provision designed specifically for cases where a magical child's safety required extraordinary measures. The ministry acted to protect Mr. Potter from Block 37 does not protect a child, Seraphine said. It confuses one. Those are different things. The intent, we have moved past intent, Seraphine said, with the particular finality of closing a door. Counselor Brandt, I would like the panel to note that the Ministry has confirmed authorization of these blocks. That confirmation establishes both the Ministry's knowledge of the blocks' existence and their acceptance of responsibility for their effects. Brandt made a note. So noted. Fudge sat down. Umbridge's smile had not moved. Harry looked at her and found, to his mild interest, that she didn't alarm him. She was calculating, he could see that, her small eyes moving around the room with a precise inventory of threats and resources, but the calculation of a person managing a damage limitation exercise was a different thing from actual power, and he could see the difference now in a way he wasn't sure he could have managed a week ago. He thought about the weighted vest again. About how different standing felt without it. Dumbledore was called to speak after lunch. He walked to the center of the chamber with the unhurried ease of a man who has decided exactly what he is going to say and has made a kind of peace with it. He looked around the room once, and then he looked at Harry, and for a moment the whole room was just those two. I will not waste this tribunal's time with justifications that dress themselves as explanations, Dumbledore said. His voice was the one Harry knew best, quiet, precise, carrying its own gravity. I will say plainly what I did and why I did it, and I will allow this panel and Harry himself to judge whether my reasons were sufficient. He was quiet for a moment. When Harry was 15 months old, his mother performed a sacrifice that left an extraordinary magical residue in her son's core. The nature of that residue, what it meant for his developing magical inheritance, his connection to the Peveril line, the specific qualities of power it was beginning to unlock, was, at that age, already beyond anything I could safely predict or prepare for in a child being raised by muggles with no magical awareness. He paused. I made a decision. I placed 11 blocks. My intention was to ensure that his power developed gradually, safely, within parameters he and the people around him could manage. You decided, Sirius said, from across the chamber. Brandt looked at him. Mr. Black, he decided, Sirius said again, and the flatness in his voice was worse than any shouting. Without asking. Without telling. Without, he stopped. He set his hands on his knees and stopped, and the quality of that stopping made it clear how much it was costing him. Dumbledore looked at Sirius and his expression did something complicated. Yes, Sirius. I decided. He had a godfather, Sirius said. He had people who would have, you were in Azkaban, Dumbledore said quietly. And the people who would have, he stopped. Lily and James were gone. The people who might have guided him wisely were gone or unavailable, or I did not trust them to put Harry's broader safety above their grief. He paused. That includes myself. I was grieving too. I made decisions in grief that I would not make now. That's meant to make this better? Sirius asked. No, Dumbledore said. It is meant to be honest. The chamber was very quiet. Harry had been listening to all of this the way he'd been listening to everything today, with a kind of focused steadiness that had surprised him when he first noticed it. He wasn't numb. The anger was there, constant and geological, deep under everything. But it wasn't running him. He'd decided, sometime in the 3 days between Hogwarts and Geneva, that he was going to use this tribunal to understand rather than to perform understanding, and the distinction mattered. Professor, he said. Dumbledore looked at him. The block on Sirius, Harry said. The one that prevented me from sensing him. Finding him. He kept his voice even. That one wasn't about protecting me from my own power. That was about keeping me away from him specifically. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Yes. Why? Another pause. This one longer. Because Sirius, in his grief and his guilt, would have told you things before you were ready to what? Harry said. Know my own story? Know the full scope of it, Dumbledore said. There are elements of your history, of your role in what is coming, that require, my role, Harry said. Not angrily. Just with the precision of someone identifying the exact word that holds the weight. I have a role. That you decided on. And the blocks were part of managing me toward it. Dumbledore's expression, for the first time, showed something unguarded. Not guilt exactly, more like the expression of a man hearing his own reasoning stated plainly for the first time and finding it less comfortable than it was in his own head. That is, he stopped. That is not entirely inaccurate. Albus. Brant's voice was not unkind, but it was very clear. This panel will need specific answers to specific questions. I suggest we proceed systematically. The afternoon session was where the blocks broke. Not metaphorically, literally. Seraphine had requested and been granted permission to conduct a partial unblocking in the chamber itself, supervised by the panel, as demonstrative evidence of what the blocks were and what their removal revealed. Harry had agreed to this at 9 that morning, which now felt like a long time ago. He sat in a chair that had been brought to the center of the room. The marble floor was cold through his shoes. The chamber was full and very quiet. Seraphine stood behind him and looked at the panel. I will remove 6 of the ministry-placed blocks. The ones I have identified as most clearly suppressory rather than connected to the scar or the inheritance complications. The panel and all present will be able to observe the magical signature that surfaces as each one is released. You have the subject's consent? Brant asked. Yes, Harry said, before Seraphine could answer for him. Seraphine placed her hands lightly on his shoulders. Harry felt the warmth begin, the working entering him in that same careful layered way. Around the room, he was vaguely aware of people adjusting their positions, sitting forward, and Sirius had gripped the edge of his seat with both hands. The first block came apart. The air in the chamber changed. Harry felt it leave him the way you feel a held breath release, a wave of sensation that moved outward, and several people in the observer section made sounds. One of the junior panel members said something sharp in German. The older man from Japan had gone very still. Because what came off Harry Potter when a ministry suppression was removed was not subtle. It was the magical equivalent of a lamp being uncovered, a warm, deep, layered radiance that had nothing performative about it, nothing showboating, just the simple factual presence of what had been compressed into a smaller space finally allowed more room. It filled the chamber like sound fills a space, moving into all the corners. Fudge, in the front row, had gone slightly pale. The second block. The third. By the fourth, 2 of the panel members were consulting quietly and urgently with each other. By the 5th, Umbridge Smile was doing considerably more work to stay in place. By the 6th, the chamber was so quiet that Harry could hear the lake outside the building, the Geneva water lapping against old stone, and the sound of his own breathing, which was very steady. Seraphine stepped back. Harry sat in the chair in the center of the pale marble room, and the quality of his presence in the space was different from what it had been an hour ago, and everyone in the chamber knew it, and nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Brant said, quietly, the panel will take a 10-minute recess. In the corridor outside, Sirius found Harry at a window overlooking the cobblestone street below. He stood next to him without speaking for a moment. Harry watched a Muggle woman with a pushchair navigate the cobblestones and disappear around a corner, perfectly unaware of the building beside her or what was happening in it. How do you feel? Sirius asked. Like I keep answering that question, Harry said. But, good. Clearer. He looked at Sirius sideways. How do you feel? Sirius laughed, short and rough. Like I want to go back in there and say things that would be counterproductive. He ran a hand through his hair. Dumbledore. Bloody Dumbledore. He stopped. He visited me in Azkaban, you know. Twice. Told me Harry was safe. Told me you were settled, doing well. Told me, his voice went tight. He never mentioned the blocks. Never mentioned what he'd done. Visited me in that place and looked me in the eye, and never once, he believed it was necessary, Harry said. I know, Sirius said. That's what makes it hard to be simply angry. If he'd done it out of cruelty it would be easier. He looked at the window. He did it because he genuinely believed he was protecting you. Managing you. Running his long game with you as the piece he couldn't afford to lose. His voice quieted. You were never just a boy to him, Harry. You were always also a weapon he was trying to sharpen without breaking. Harry absorbed this. That's a very serious way of putting it. I had a lot of time to think in Azkaban, Sirius said, and there was a dark humor in it that Harry recognized as the same mechanism he himself used. Gallows humor. The specific comedy of people who've been through things. He's not going to come out of today well, Harry said. No, Sirius agreed. But he's not. Harry stopped, trying to find the right words. He's not Voldemort. He's not Fudge. He did something genuinely wrong for reasons that were genuinely complicated. And I'm angry, and I'm going to stay angry for a while, and I'm also not going to pretend it's simpler than it is. Sirius looked at him. The gray eyes were doing several things at once again, but at the front of all of them was something that looked like awe, quiet and somewhat helpless. James would have been, he started. Don't, Harry said gently. A pause. Right. Sorry. He cleared his throat. Your mum, then. Your mum would have, Sirius. Been extraordinarily proud. I'm saying it. Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he looked back out the window. Come on, he said. We should go back in. The afternoon's formal testimonies included 3 ministry officials who had been named in connection with specific blocks. 2 of them gave managed, careful answers that said very little. The third, a mid-level official named Dawlish, who had apparently been the one dispatched to Privet Drive in 1984, said something that changed the afternoon. He'd been under a mild compulsion to answer questions accurately, standard tribunal procedure, and Brant had walked him through the events of August 1984 with meticulous patience, and he'd confirmed each element, the dispatch order, the specific nature of the block placed, the authorization chain that had sanctioned it. Brant asked, who specifically authorized this dispatch? Dawlish said, with the expression of a man watching his career make a decision his face couldn't stop, the authorization came from the office of the senior undersecretary to the minister. The chamber absorbed this. And who held that position in August of 1984? Brant asked. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm what everyone in the room was already calculating. Dawlish looked at Umbridge. He didn't say the name. He didn't need to. Every set of eyes in the chamber had already traveled from Dawlish to the small woman in pink, and Dolores Umbridge's smile, for the first time all day, went somewhere different. Not afraid, she was too practiced to show fear, but recalibrated. Reassessing. The expression of someone reordering pieces at speed. I see, Brant said. I would like to note, Umbridge said, rising smoothly, her voice sweet and precise, that the records of the senior undersecretary's office during that period would need to be, the records have already been subpoenaed, Seraphine said, from her seat. She had the restrained expression of someone who had known this moment was coming and had been patient about getting there. They were requested when we filed the initial complaint. The relevant documents are part of the formal submission to this panel. She paused. Would you like me to call up the specific authorization order, with the relevant signature, on the chamber display? Umbridge's smile stayed. Her eyes did not. Please do, Brant said. The document appeared in the air above the central table, enlarged and clear, and the chamber read it in silence, and the silence that followed was the specific silence of a thing being understood completely. Harry watched Fudge very carefully during that silence. The minister's expression was controlled, but he had moved his hands from the table to his lap, and Harry could see, from the angle he was sitting, that they were clasped tight enough that the knuckles had whitened. Fudge was calculating, rapidly, what the most survivable position now looked like, and the calculation was not going well. "Minister Fudge," Brant said. Fudge stood. "Counselor. In light of this evidence, do you have anything to add to your earlier statement?" A pause that contained a great deal of internal activity. "I would request an opportunity to consult with Ministry Legal Counsel before. You may have 1 hour," Brant said. "We will reconvene at 5 o'clock." The gavel came down. The room erupted into noise, and Harry sat in the middle of it and thought about a girl in a corridor who had found a book flying off a high shelf and thought it was extraordinary, and about a teacher's face going light and then, wrong, going blank, and about how someone had decided at the age of 4 that Harry Potter was not allowed to be extraordinary. Was not allowed to be known as extraordinary. Was not allowed to be any of the things he actually was. That decision had been made by a specific person. It was on a document on that display, right now, visible to every representative of every magical nation in the room. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Sirius, who was watching him with those gray eyes. "When this is over," Harry said, "I want to learn everything." Sirius blinked. "Everything what?" "Everything I should have been taught. Everything that was blocked, not just the power, but the knowledge. The history. The inheritance." He paused. "I want to know who I actually am." Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then he put one hand on Harry's shoulder, briefly, and said, "Yeah, kid. Yeah, we'll do that," in a voice that was doing its best to be steady and not quite managing it. Fudge's hour of consultation with legal counsel produced, at 5 o'clock, a statement that was a masterpiece of saying something while committing to nothing. He acknowledged that the diagnostic findings were significant, confirmed the ministry's intention to cooperate fully with any remedial recommendations, and carefully avoided using any word that could be read as an admission of the thing the document on the display had already proven. It did not matter. Brant announced at 5:30 that the panel had enough to proceed to findings, which would be issued within 48 hours, and that the findings would include formal remedial orders under Article 34, meaning mandatory removal of all ministry-sanctioned blocks, reparations to the subject, and a review of the extraordinary circumstances provision that had been used to authorize them. She also announced that the full diagnostic record and tribunal testimony would be forwarded to the ICW's Department of Magical Persons' Rights for a formal investigation into individual accountability. Fudge left the chamber quickly, with Umbridge close behind, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man rethinking a great number of things simultaneously. Percy Weasley left with them, and Harry noticed that Percy did not look at him as he passed, which was a kind of answer in itself. Dumbledore remained seated as the chamber emptied. He looked older than he had that morning, in a way that had nothing to do with age, more as though something that had been held in tension had finally, after a long time, let go. Harry walked across to him. Sirius came too, slightly behind, giving Harry the lead. "You'll cooperate with the removal," Harry said. "Not a question." Dumbledore looked up at him. "Of course. All 11. Yes." Harry was quiet for a moment, looking at the old man sitting in the empty chair in the pale marble chamber, and the anger was there, steady and patient, and underneath it was something that wasn't forgiveness but wasn't its absence either. Was something more complicated than either. The shape of a relationship that had been one thing and was now permanently altered but not destroyed. "I need you to tell me," Harry said. "Everything you haven't told me. Not managed. Not in pieces because you've decided when I'm ready. All of it." He paused. "There's a prophecy. I know there's a prophecy, I've felt the absence of it. The block around it." Dumbledore's expression shifted. "Yes. Tell me." "Not here," Dumbledore said. "Not today." But, he met Harry's eyes. "You are right. You deserve to know. I will tell you. Soon, and fully." A pause. "I find myself, less certain of my management than I was. The tribunal has clarified some things for me. Good, Harry said. That's good. He turned to go, and then stopped. Professor. Yes, Harry. The magical blocks you placed, they were because you were worried. Because you were alone with a decision and you made it in grief and panic and the best intelligence you had. Harry looked at him over his shoulder. I understand that. I don't think you're a bad person. A pause. But understanding it doesn't make it okay. And I need you to know that I know the difference. He left. Sirius fell into step beside him. They walked out of the chamber, down the marble corridor, toward the stairs, and neither of them said anything until they were out in the cold Geneva evening air, the lake somewhere beyond the buildings catching the last of the light. Seraphine was waiting on the steps with Fleur, both of them in their coats, and Fleur was holding 2 cups of coffee, and she handed one to Harry as he came through the door with the practicality of someone who had anticipated the need without asking. He took it. The warmth of it in his hands was very real and very present. The panel's findings come in 2 days, Seraphine said. They will be formal orders. Binding on the British ministry. She looked at Harry steadily. Today was important. Yeah, Harry said. He looked at the lake. The last light on the water. It felt like it. How do you feel? Fleur asked, and her voice had none of the social performance of the question, just the actual asking of it. Harry drank some of the coffee. It was very good coffee, which seemed like a small extravagant mercy. Like something's been set in motion, he said. Like we've cracked the door open and now it's going to keep going. He looked at her. Is that what it feels like? When something actually changes? Fleur considered this with the seriousness it deserved. I think, she said, it feels like being very cold and someone handing you coffee. Harry looked at the cup in his hands. Then he smiled, properly, for the first time since Geneva. Yeah, he said. That's exactly what it feels like. Behind him, Sirius made a quiet sound that was entirely different from the one he'd made all day, something lighter, something like relief, and the 5 of them stood on the steps of the ICW building while the Geneva evening came in around them, cold and clear and smelling of lake water and old stone and possibility. Chapter 4 Inheritance. The panel's findings arrived on a Thursday morning in the form of a golden-sealed scroll delivered by an ICW owl so official-looking it made Hedwig appear casual. Harry read them at the Gryffindor table with Ron on one side and Hermione on the other, and the 3 of them read in silence because the document deserved silence. The findings were 42 pages of precise, unsparing legal language that said, in essence, what had already been clear to everyone in that chamber, but now it was binding, documented, and internationally enforced. Mandatory removal of all ministry-sanctioned blocks. A formal reparations process. An ICW investigation into individual accountability that named 4 ministry officials, including one whose name Harry had watched the chamber reach without Dawlish actually saying it. Umbridge's name was in print. On an official ICW document. Harry read that part twice. They're going to fight it, Hermione said. She was already 3 pages ahead, her eyes moving fast. The ministry. They'll comply publicly and fight it privately, challenge the ICW jurisdiction, claim the extraordinary circumstances provision supersedes Article 34, they can try, Harry said. They will try, Harry, and they have people who are very good at, Hermione. He looked at her. Let them try. She looked back at him. Read something in his face. Closed her mouth on the next 3 arguments she'd been preparing. Okay, she said, after a moment. Ron had reached the page with Umbridge's name and let out a breath through his nose that expressed a great deal without words. The rest of the table gave Harry a wide berth, not from hostility but from the particular social awareness that something significant was happening in his section of the bench and it was better to respect the radius. Neville, sitting across from him, glanced at the scroll and then at Harry's face and quietly passed the marmalade without being asked, which was perhaps the most Neville gesture Harry had ever received. "Thank you," Harry said. "Looked like you needed it," Neville said simply, and went back to his breakfast. Dumbledore came to find him that evening. Harry had been expecting it, the headmaster had said soon and fully in Geneva, and Dumbledore, whatever his other failures, kept his word. He appeared at the door of an empty classroom on the 4th floor where Harry had been sitting alone after dinner, working through the list he and Seraphine had discussed of what still needed to happen. The remaining 15 blocks. The inheritance issues. The scar. Dumbledore conjured 2 comfortable chairs with the ease of long practice and sat in one, and Harry sat in the other, and between them was the absence of the usual dynamic, the headmaster in his tower, the student looking up. This was different. Something had rearranged itself. "The prophecy," Harry said. "Yes." Dumbledore reached into his robes and produced a small glass sphere, a pensive memory, not the prophecy itself but a recording of it. "I want you to hear it in her voice." Sybil Trelawney, 17 years ago, in an interview for the Divination Post. She didn't know what she was saying. The real ones never do. He held it out. Harry took it. He placed it to his temple the way Dumbledore demonstrated, and the memory flooded in, a dusty room, a woman going blank-eyed and wrong in a way that had nothing theatrical about it, a voice that was not Trelawney's voice speaking with the certainty of something far older than any single person. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. Harry came back to the classroom. He sat with it for a moment. "The power he knows not," he said. "Yes. What is it?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "I believed, for many years, that it was love. The sacrificial protection your mother left in you. The capacity for it." He paused. "I still believe that is part of it. But the tribunal, and Seraphine's diagnostic, have suggested to me that the full answer is rather larger than I understood." He folded his hands. "Your Peverell inheritance. The thing the seals on your bloodline have been containing. I believe that is also part of what the prophecy means." "The mastery of death," Harry said. "She said it was a metaphor." "Seraphine is correct that it is a metaphor," Dumbledore said. "But metaphors point at things. The Peverells didn't just create 3 objects. They were, naturally positioned at an intersection of magical forces that most wizards never approach. The original Peverell heir was not the master of death in the sense of conquering it. He was its intermediary. Death as a force has an opposite, and the Peverells were the bloodline through which that balance was maintained. He looked at Harry carefully. "You are the last direct line descendant. The seals on your bloodline were placed, centuries ago, to prevent that power from surfacing at the wrong time, in the wrong person, in the wrong circumstances. They were intended as a dormancy, not a suppression." He paused. "But someone, more recently, added suppressions on top of the dormancy seals. Not the 15 Seraphine couldn't trace. Others. So there are suppressions that weren't in her count? There are suppressions woven into the dormancy seals that are extremely difficult to distinguish from the seals themselves," Dumbledore said. "I believe that is what the 15 she could not trace actually are, not additions from outside, but the original seals altered from the inside. Tampered with." He met Harry's eyes. Someone wanted the dormancy to be permanent rather than temporary. Harry thought about this. Voldemort? Possibly. Possibly someone acting in his interest before he lost his body. A pause. "I have been trying to identify them. I have not yet succeeded. Does Seraphine know this?" "I contacted her this afternoon," Dumbledore said. "She was not pleased that I hadn't mentioned it during the tribunal. I explained that I had only understood it fully in the last 48 hours, which is true. A brief pause. She accepted this with a grace that I did not feel I deserved. Harry looked at the old man across from him, the weight of him, the genuine complexity of him, and felt again that thing that was not forgiveness and not its absence. "The blocks you placed," he said. "When do they come out?" "Whenever you choose," Dumbledore said. "On my end, there is no ceremony required. They were placed with my intent and they can be released with it." He paused. "I would recommend doing it gradually. 11 is not a small number and the ones I placed were, quite deep." "Seraphine will do it," Harry said. "She's already planning to work on the remaining 15. We'll do yours at the same time." Dumbledore nodded. "That is sensible." He rose from his chair, and for a moment he was just an old man standing in a classroom, without the architecture of his reputation around him. "Harry. I am sorry. I know that doesn't resolve anything." "No," Harry agreed. "It doesn't." He looked at him. "But I believe you mean it. And that matters a little." It wasn't much. But it was honest, and honesty was what the moment required. The castle had a different quality at night when Harry walked back up to Gryffindor Tower. He wasn't sure if it was the castle that had changed or himself, but the corridors felt less oppressive than they usually did after dark, less like a place waiting to ambush him and more like a place that had just been waiting, indifferently, while he caught up to it. He ran into Fleur on the 4th-floor landing. She was coming up the stairs from below, wrapped in a coat over her Beauxbatons robes, her hair loose and slightly wind-messed, which meant she'd been outside. She stopped when she saw him, and for a moment they just stood there on the landing with the torches flickering and the castle quiet around them. "Where have you been?" Harry asked. "The lake," she said. "I think better near water." She looked at him, noting something in his face. "Dumbledore?" "Just now, yeah." He leaned against the stone wall. "Prophecy and everything." Fleur absorbed this. She came to stand beside him, also leaning against the wall, looking at the corridor in the same direction. This had become, without announcement, a thing they did, standing side by side and talking at the middle distance rather than at each other, which somehow made the conversations easier. "Are you frightened?" she asked. "Of the prophecy? Of any of it?" Harry thought about it genuinely. "I think I was frightened all the time, before. Not about specific things, just a constant low-level fear that I couldn't name and couldn't locate." He paused. "It's less, now. Since the blocks started coming out." He glanced at her. "Some of those blocks were on my fear response. Seraphine mentioned it in passing. Someone decided I should be more afraid than I naturally am." Fleur was quiet for a moment. "That is, a very particular kind of cruelty," she said. "Yeah." He looked at the corridor. "What's weird is that it should make me more angry, knowing that. And it does, a bit. But mostly I just feel," he stopped. "Lighter. Like I put something down." "What will you do?" she asked. "With all of it. The inheritance, the power, the tournament, Voldemort," she said the name without flinching, which Harry appreciated. "You have been given a great deal of information in a very short time." "I'm going to finish the tournament," Harry said. "Not because I put my name in, I didn't, but because walking away from it doesn't actually solve anything and it's not who I am." He paused. "And I'm going to keep working with Seraphine on the remaining blocks. And I'm going to learn everything Sirius and Dumbledore can teach me, now that they're actually going to teach me instead of managing me." Another pause. "And Voldemort is coming back. This year, I think. The tournament is connected to it." He said this flatly, the way you state a weather forecast. "I'm going to be ready for that." Fleur looked at him. The torchlight caught the angles of her face. "You say that the way other people say they are going to be ready for an exam." "An exam with higher stakes," Harry said. Something moved across her face, the quick bright thing he'd started to look for in her expression, the one that usually preceded the unsuppressed honesty that she mostly kept on a short leash. "I want to help," she said. "With the preparation. The tournament tasks are still competitive, I know, and I will still compete against you, obviously," Harry said. "But what is coming after the tournament is not a competition." "And she stopped. The Veela composure was doing its job, mostly. "My instincts tell me," she said carefully, "that being near you matters." "Preparation ally." She said the word with a slight emphasis that made it clear she was aware of how it sounded and had chosen it deliberately because it was the least revealing version of what she actually meant. Harry looked at her for a moment. "Preparation ally," he repeated. "Yes. Is that a real word?" "It is now." He smiled. She looked at the middle distance very firmly. "Okay," he said. "Help, then. I'll take it." She nodded with the decisive air of someone completing a business arrangement, and the slight color in her face had nothing to do with the torchlight, and both of them chose not to mention it. 3 days later, Seraphine performed the second deep working. This time it was in a room Dumbledore had made available, a private chamber off the 3rd floor that McGonagall had quietly cleared and prepared, which Harry thought said something about where McGonagall's loyalties were actually located when you stripped away the institutional duty. The room was plain stone and warm candlelight, and this time Sirius was present as well as Fleur, sitting together against the far wall with the slightly awkward air of two people who have very little in common except significant concern for the same person. They had become, in the 4 days since Geneva, something Harry hadn't expected, carefully, circling friendly. Sirius had initially regarded Fleur with the automatic suspicion of someone whose recent experience had not encouraged easy trust, and Fleur had regarded Sirius with the cool assessment she gave everyone until they proved themselves worth more. The thing that had broken the ice was, embarrassingly, Sirius making a joke about Umbridge's fashion choices at breakfast 2 days ago, and Fleur laughing at it, a real laugh, unguarded, the one Harry was starting to hoard like something rare, and Sirius looking at her with visible reassessment. Now they sat side by side and both of them watched the center of the room with the same quality of attention. Seraphine began. Dumbledore's 11 came out in the first 40 minutes. Harry had expected this to be the worst part, given that Dumbledore's blocks were the deepest, the oldest, the most carefully placed. What he hadn't expected was what surfaced when they released. Not memories, this time. Not specific experiences. What came up was more fundamental, the raw, unmediated quality of his own magic, the parts of it that Dumbledore had kept in slow-burn dormancy since 15 months old, finally allowed into full circulation. It was, he didn't have a word for it. He had approximately the sensation of having lived his whole life with a slightly wrong heartbeat and suddenly hearing the correct rhythm, and the recognition of correctness was so immediate and complete that he had to breathe very carefully for a moment. The candles in the room did something. They flared, all of them, simultaneously, and then held, burning about twice as bright as they had been, and the light they gave was warm and gold and had a quality that torchlight didn't usually have. Sirius said something very quietly in the way of people who are trying not to interrupt. Fleur had gone completely still in the corner, and her eyes, when Harry caught them briefly through the working, had gone slightly wide in a way that was not fear and was not surprise but was something between them that didn't quite have a clean name. She looked, Harry thought in the split second before the next thing hit him, like someone watching a fire that was much larger than they'd known the room could hold. The next block, one of the Ministry's remaining 3, was ugly and it was fast, and it took Seraphine 3 concentrated minutes to work through it because it had been placed with a roughness that the others hadn't had. Not the careful, deliberate placement of the older blocks. This one had the feel of something done in a hurry by someone who didn't care about finesse, only result. A blunt instrument wrapped in bureaucratic authorization. When it broke, Harry had a fractured flash, a room he didn't recognize, an adult voice speaking very quickly over his head, a sensation of being held still, and then it was gone, and in its place was the particular sharp fury that had no target yet because the person who had done it was still alive and free and currently employed and smiling in pink. He let the fury sit where it was. He didn't close around it. It was information. The working went deep after that. The 14 blocks from Dumbledore and the Ministry had accounted for the suppression layer. What Seraphine was working through now was something different, the older material, the inherited dormancy seals and whatever had been layered on top of them. She'd warned him this would take longer and feel different, and she was right on both counts. It didn't feel like pressure or pain this time. It felt like excavation. Like something very old was being carefully uncovered, layer by layer, and what was underneath was not violent or explosive but was patient. As though it had been waiting a very long time for someone to come down and find it and wasn't in any hurry now that it was finally being reached. The Peveril inheritance. He felt it before it fully surfaced, a deep harmonic in his magic, something that resonated at a frequency older than Hogwarts, older than the wizarding world as he knew it. The best metaphor he had was of standing in a very old library and feeling the age of it in the air, the accumulated weight of history and intention and permanence. Except it wasn't external. It was in him. Had always been in him, buried under everything else. The first seal released. The room's temperature changed. Not dropped, changed, the way air changes before a storm, the ions in it shifting into a new arrangement. Sirius was on his feet, he registered that, and Fleur had moved instinctively forward in the way she'd moved during the 41st block in the carriage, closer, and Seraphine was speaking the ritual very fast and very steadily and her hands on his shoulders had a grip now that hadn't been there before, bracing. The second seal. Harry Potter, the one who had survived on luck and bravado and other people's sacrifices, the one who had been suppressed and managed and shaped by other hands, that version of him didn't dissolve or disappear. He was still there. But something came up behind him, underneath him, something so much larger and older and more inevitable that the comparison was geological. Like the difference between a river and the ocean the river was flowing toward. He kept breathing. He stayed open. The third seal. A sound that was not a sound moved through the room. More like a vibration felt in the chest than heard with the ears. Both candles and Sirius's wand tip and the ambient light from the corridor under the door all flared gold simultaneously and then settled into something richer and more present. Sirius had his wand out but was not pointing it at anything, clearly unsure where to point it, just needing to have it. Fleur was at Harry's right side again and her hand found his arm the same way it had in the carriage, the same steady grip, and he felt the Veela warmth of her presence like a compass finding north. The fourth seal broke on its own. That one Seraphine hadn't touched. She actually made a sound, brief, sharp, in French, and then went back to the ritual, but Harry felt her surprise through her hands, the slight tension of the unexpected. The fourth seal had simply gone. As though it recognized what was happening and removed itself. The silence after was extraordinary. Seraphine stepped back. Harry sat in the chair and the room breathed around him and nobody spoke for a long moment. He was different. He had been different after the first working, and more different after Geneva, but this was something that didn't have a scale to measure on because it wasn't a difference of degree. It was a difference of kind. Like the distinction between being a map and being the territory. He held out his hand, palm up, and looked at it. Nothing dramatic. Nothing visible. No fire, no light, no convenient magical display. His hand looked like his hand always did, the callus from the Quidditch broom, the scar from first year, the familiar geography of it. But the magic under the skin was different. Not louder, not more aggressive. Deeper. More settled. More, of a piece with everything else, the way a river is of a piece with its banks and bed, not fighting its own nature but moving in complete accord with it. For seals, Seraphine said. She was breathing carefully. Of the original 8 dormancy seals, 4 have released. The remaining 4 they require the scar working, I think. They are connected to whatever Voldemort's interference put in place. Harry lowered his hand. How many blocks total remain? 3. She paused. The 7 from Voldemort scar interference, and the 4 dormancy seals still intact. Everything else is gone. She looked at him with the expression Harry had started to associate with her deepest assessments, the ones she usually kept interior. Harry. Do you understand what you are right now, with half the Peveril inheritance active and the rest of the suppression cleared? Not entirely, he said honestly. You are. She stopped, and the stopping meant something because Seraphine did not stop. There is no accurate frame of reference, in current magical taxonomy, for what you are becoming. The Peveril dormancy was placed on the line for a reason. The last time it was fully active, she shook her head. There are accounts. Old ones. Not comfortable reading. Good or bad accounts? She considered. Neither. They described something that was neither good nor bad. Something that simply was. A person who existed at the intersection of every magical force simultaneously, without the usual boundaries between them. She looked at him. Death, life, time, possibility. Not in the dramatic sense of children's stories. In the practical, factual sense. A person for whom magic, all magic, responds the way a candle responds to wind. Not because they force it. Because they are what they are. The room was very quiet. That's what the prophecy means, Sirius said from the corner. His voice was low. The power he knows not. It's not a specific spell or ability. He gestured. This. A nature rather than a weapon, Harry said. Yes, Seraphine said. Which is, I would argue, considerably more significant than a weapon. Harry looked at Fleur, who was still at his right side, whose hand was still on his arm, who was looking at him with an expression that had moved past the fire in a room too small to hold it into something quieter and more certain. You are not afraid of any of this, she said. It wasn't quite a question. No, Harry said. You should perhaps be, she started. Why? He said it genuinely, not defensively. What's the productive version of being afraid of my own inheritance? He turned his hand over on his knee, palm down, palm up again. I've spent 14 years being afraid of things that someone else decided I should be afraid of. I'm done with that. He looked at her. This is mine. All of it. The Peveril line, the prophecy, Voldemort, the tournament, whatever's coming. He paused. I'm not afraid of any of it because I'm not, smaller than it. Not anymore. Fleur looked at him for a long, unguarded moment. Then she said, quietly, Non. You are not. The tournament's second task was announced the following week, underwater retrieval, something stolen, 1 hour, and Harry absorbed the announcement with the calm attention of someone who has recently had several very significant recalibrations and finds a Triwizard task appropriately proportionate. He worked with Hermione on the gillyweed solution with focused efficiency, and he worked with Sirius in the evenings on everything else, spell work, family history, the Peveril records that Sirius had retrieved from Grimmauld Place with an owl he'd sent back in a direction Harry didn't ask about. The records were old and dense and occasionally written in a form of Latin that gave even Hermione pause, but Harry read them with the particular recognition of someone finding things they already knew but didn't know they knew. Fleur found him in the library 3 nights before the second task. She appeared at his table with a book under her arm and sat down across from him without asking, which he'd come to understand was just how she operated. She opened her book. He went back to his Peveril records. They worked in parallel for 20 minutes in the comfortable silence that had become the default register of their time together. The second task, she said, without looking up. I already have a solution. Good, he said. You? Sorted. She looked up. You are going to win it. Are you going to try to stop me? Of course, she said. I am also going to win it. We'll see. We will, she agreed. Then, the third task is a maze. They told the champions today. She looked at him steadily. I think something is in the maze that has nothing to do with the tournament. Something placed specifically for you. Harry set down his quill. What makes you say that? Because someone put your name in a goblet of fire to get you here, she said. And they have not made another move since then. People who go to that kind of trouble do not simply wait. Her eyes were very direct. They are waiting for the third task. The maze is the opportunity they have been building toward. Harry looked at her. You've been thinking about this. I think about most things, she said. I think about you specifically quite a lot at present, which I find, she paused, relevant to mention. The word she'd used earlier, preparation ally, lived somewhere in the conversation without being spoken, and Harry felt the warmth of the fire in his chest, which had been a constant since the seal started releasing, respond to something specific about the way she was looking at him. Fleur, he said. After the tournament, he said. Whatever happens. He stopped, reorganized. I want you to stay. Near. Whatever that looks like practically, with you at Beauxbatons and me here. He held her eyes. I'm saying this now rather than after because if something goes wrong in the maze I don't want to have not said it. Fleur was quiet for a moment. The library moved around them, candlelight and old pages and the distant sound of students on lower floors. Something is not going to go wrong in the maze, she said. Not in the way you mean. You can't know that. I can, a little, she said. My instincts about magical signatures are quite good. A pause. And yours is, she lifted one hand and did the small expressive gesture she used when words were insufficient. Yours is not the signature of someone who loses. Harry looked at her for a long moment. That's not how it works. Non, she agreed. But it is true anyway. She met his eyes directly, with no performance, no distance, no cool competition. And yes. I will stay near. After. Whatever that looks like. The fire in his chest did something specific and Harry chose not to overthink it. Good, he said. She nodded, once, with the decisive air of an agreement completed. Then she went back to her book. He went back to his Peveril records. The library went on around them, warm and old and full of things waiting to be known. The second task came and went. Harry went into the lake and came back out with Ron, exactly on time, and when he surfaced into the pale February sunlight with his best friend coughing and spluttering beside him and the crowd making the noise that crowds made, he looked up at the judge's platform and found, without particularly looking for her, Fleur's eyes in the observer section. She'd come out of the water earlier than him, pale and shaking, one of Madame Maxime's girls in her arms. Her Veela allure had, reportedly, been dramatically less effective on the Grindylows than she'd anticipated, and the attempt to deal with them had cost her enough time that she hadn't been able to retrieve her hostage. She was wrapped in a blanket on the bank and her expression was the fierce compressed one of someone managing significant disappointment. She caught his eye. He held up 2 fingers, second place, and tilted his head at her in a question. She shook her head once, she hadn't placed well, and then lifted her chin in the way he'd learned meant I'm fine, don't make it a thing. He nodded. Turned back to making sure Ron was fully breathing. But when the scores were announced and Harry came in second with a total that put him level with Crumb at the top of the standings, he heard from Fleur's direction a sound that was not quite polite applause but was something a little more genuine than politeness, and he let that warm him up about as effectively as any towel. That night, alone in the dormitory after Ron had fallen asleep, Harry sat cross-legged on his bed and did what had become his late-night practice since the seal started releasing, simply sitting with his own magic, feeling the edges of it, the depth of it, the parts that were still sealed and the much larger parts that weren't. The Peveril inheritance that was active now moved in him with the patience of something very old. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was simply present, the way bedrock is present under moving water. Constant. Deep. Indifferent to the things that happened above it. He thought about the maze. He thought about what Fleur had said, they are waiting for the third task, and he thought about all the pieces that still needed to assemble themselves. The remaining 3 blocks connected to the scar. The 4 dormancy seals that needed the scar working before they'd release. Whatever was in the maze. Voldemort's return, which he was as certain of as he'd ever been certain of anything. He thought about who he'd been 2 weeks ago. The boy who endured. The boy who survived on luck. He thought about who he was now. He held out his hand in the dark and felt the magic respond, instant, clean, deep, and a small sphere of warm light appeared above his palm, burning steadily, needing no wand, needing no incantation, needing nothing but his own intent and his own nature. He looked at it for a moment. Then he closed his hand around it, let it go, and lay down in the dark. He had a maze to walk into. Someone waiting for him in it. A war beginning to move toward its inevitable geography. The boy who had survived was still there, underneath everything. He wasn't going anywhere. But he was not alone in himself anymore. That made, as it turned out, all the difference. Chapter 5, The People Who Did This. The name came up in a conversation Harry wasn't supposed to hear. He'd been coming down the 3rd floor corridor on a Wednesday afternoon, 2 weeks before the 3rd task, when he heard Dumbledore's voice through a partially open door, not raised, never raised, but carrying that particular quality of precision that meant the headmaster was saying something important. Harry stopped. He was not proud of stopping. He stopped anyway. Cannot verify the signature on those 3 blocks without more time, Dumbledore was saying. What I can tell you is that the methodology is consistent with someone who had access to Harry in his 2nd year. The specific targeting of his Parseltongue recognition, the block that prevented him from understanding what he was hearing, that required proximity and opportunity. Seraphine's voice, cooler, and the emotional suppression block. The one placed over his grief responses. A pause that lasted 3 seconds too long. That one is more recent. 3rd year. I believe it was placed during the incident at the Shrieking Shack. Harry stood very still in the corridor. Someone was in the Shrieking Shack with him, Seraphine said. Several people were in the Shrieking Shack with him, Dumbledore said. In fairly chaotic circumstances. Who had the means and the motive to suppress his grief specifically? Another pause. Someone who needed him functional rather than emotional. Someone who understood that grief, in Harry, activates rather than paralyzes, that his protective instincts sharpen when he's grieving, and that sharp protective instincts in Harry Potter are inconvenient for certain plans. Harry thought about the Shrieking Shack. He thought about the people who had been in that room. Sirius. Remus. Pettigrew. Snape, who had come through the tunnel at the wrong moment. And then Pettigrew had escaped, and Sirius had been taken, and in the chaos, he walked away from the door before he heard anything else. Not because he didn't want to know. Because he needed to think before he knew more. He found Sirius that evening in the room Dumbledore had cleared for their sessions, sitting at the table with a glass of something amber and a pile of black family documents that he'd been working through with the grim efficiency of someone conducting a forensic audit. Harry sat down across from him. Sirius looked up. Read his face. Set down the glass. What happened? Snape, Harry said. The word sat between them. Sirius went very still in the way of a man deciding how to handle something carefully. What about him? Sirius said. I overheard Dumbledore and Seraphine. 3rd year, Shrieking Shack, there's a grief suppression block that Seraphine identified, placed on me during the chaos of that night. Someone who needed me functional, not emotional, because my protective instincts sharpen when I'm grieving and that's inconvenient for certain plans. Harry kept his voice level. Who does that describe, in that room? Sirius was quiet for a long moment. His hands were flat on the table. It could describe several, Sirius. He let out a breath. Snape was there, yes. And Snape has Reasons to want certain things suppressed in you. Reasons that go back to your father and to his own history. He stopped. But I don't want to, tell me the reasons. Harry, I'm not asking you to accuse him. I'm asking you to tell me the reasons so I can evaluate them myself. Harry looked at him steadily. You don't have to protect me from information anymore. That's been the whole point of the last 3 weeks. Sirius looked at him for a moment, and the expression on his face was doing the complicated thing, the grief and the fury and the something that wants to be hope, and then it settled into the plain factual register that meant he'd decided to be honest. Snape was a Death Eater, he said. A real one. Not an infiltrator, not a spy, a true believer, at least for a period. He turned informant before your parents died, which is the reason Dumbledore trusts him. But Dumbledore's trust has parameters. And Snape's motivations are not simple. He paused. He hated James. Genuinely, deeply hated him, for reasons that were partially James's fault and partially not. And that hatred transferred to you in a way that Dumbledore has always managed around rather than addressed. His jaw tightened. And there are elements of Snape's investment in your situation that I have never entirely understood. The access he was given to you. The specific ways in which Dumbledore has arranged for him to be in your orbit. A pause. It has always felt like more than just a potions teacher who dislikes a student. Harry was quiet, turning this over. Does Dumbledore know what Snape did in the shack? I don't know, Sirius said. I don't know whether Dumbledore knows, suspected, or, he stopped. Or authorized. The word landed with weight. Would he? Harry asked. Authorize someone placing blocks on me that he didn't place himself? Sirius met his eyes. The Dumbledore who placed 11 blocks on you because he decided that was the right call without asking anyone? I think, yes. I think if Snape came to him and said the boy's grief is becoming operationally inconvenient, and framed it in terms of the war and the prophecy, yes. I think Dumbledore might have authorized it. He paused. Might not have thought of it as a block. Might have thought of it as management, Harry said. Yeah. Harry looked at the amber glass on the table. I need to talk to Snape. Harry, not to accuse him in front of witnesses. Just, I want to look at him when I ask him. He met Sirius's eyes. I'll know if he's lying. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. The thing that crossed his face was partly protective instinct and partly something else, the recognition that the person across the table was not the boy who needed protecting in the way he'd been treating him. I want to be there, he said. You can't be there, Harry said. You and Snape in the same room will result in something counterproductive. Yes, I'm aware. Sirius's jaw worked. Fine. But you tell me everything he says, immediately after. Obviously, Harry said. He found Snape in the potions classroom the next morning before breakfast, which was the time Snape was always there and the time the fewest people would see Harry going in or coming out. He knocked on the open door. Snape was at the front bench, writing something, and he looked up with the particular expression he reserved for Harry, a compressed mixture of dislike and something more complicated underneath it. Potter, he said. The dislike was the first layer. What do you want? To talk, Harry said. He walked into the room and closed the door behind him without being invited, and something shifted in Snape's expression at that, a fractional reassessment, quick and hidden. I have nothing to discuss with you before 8 in the morning, Snape said. He looked back at his writing. Seraphine Beauvais has a full diagnostic record of every block placed on my magical core, Harry said. Every one. Signature, date, and method. Snape's quill did not pause. But his hand tightened on it, just slightly, and Harry caught it. Fascinating, Snape said flatly. Shrieking Shack, June 1994, Harry said. Grief suppression block. Placed during a chaotic situation involving multiple witnesses, which provided excellent cover. He walked to the front of the room and stopped on the other side of the bench from Snape. "Do you want to tell me what you were thinking, or would you rather I let Seraphine present it at a follow-up tribunal?" Snape set down his quill. He looked at Harry. The expression was not what Harry had expected, not the cold contempt, not the theatrical cruelty that characterized their potions lessons. What was there instead was something Harry had never seen on Snape's face before. Not guilt, exactly. Something more like recognition. The expression of a man looking at a bill he's been expecting. "Sit down," Snape said. "I'm fine standing." Snape looked at him for another moment. Then he sat back in his own chair with the posture of someone settling in for something they've been putting off. "The block I placed," he said, and the sentence itself was a kind of acknowledgement that Harry filed away, "was not placed to harm you. What I would ask you to consider, I'm not interested in intent," Harry said. "I've heard a lot about intent in the last 3 weeks. Tell me the actual reasoning." Snape's eyes narrowed slightly, not the professor's annoyance, something sharper, and then he said, "When you grieve, Potter, your magic becomes unpredictable in ways that are specifically dangerous to people in your immediate vicinity. What occurred in the Shrieking Shack, Pettigrew's escape, Black's capture, the Dark Lord's continued interest in you, the combination of factors would have, unchecked, produced a magical response from you that you were not equipped to control." A pause. The block was temporary. Designed to release within 48 hours. He said the last sentence with something that might have been, in someone else, defensiveness. "It didn't release," Harry said. Snape was still. "What?" The grief suppression block from the Shrieking Shack was one of the ones Seraphine identified as still present when she first examined me, Harry said. "It didn't release in 48 hours. It's been in place for over a year." The expression that moved across Snape's face was, genuinely, something Harry had never seen there before. It was not comfortable to look at, because it was the expression of a man encountering a fact that contradicts something he's told himself, the specific face of someone who has believed a justification and is watching it develop a problem. "That's not possible," Snape said quietly. "The parameters I used, apparently something prevented the natural release," Harry said. "Another block, possibly. Or the interaction with the other suppressions already in place." He kept his voice even. "The diagnostic record will show the failure to release as evidence of the original placement. It's still going to be presented to the tribunal follow-up." Snape was quiet for a long moment. The classroom was cold and smelled of dried herbs and stone and the remnants of potions long since brewed. In the early morning light coming through the windows, Snape looked older than his years and more tired than his face usually admitted. "You are going to ask me what I was actually protecting," Snape said. He didn't say it accusatorially. He said it the way someone says a thing they know is coming. "Yes," Harry said. A pause. "Myself, partially," Snape said, with the flat honesty of someone who has decided that performance is not available to them anymore. "If your magic had discharged uncontrolled in that room, I was in the room. Pettigrew was in the room. Black was," he stopped. "And partially I was protecting the situation. Dumbledore's plan. The long game." He looked at Harry. "I have spent 15 years as a piece in Dumbledore's long game, Potter. Sometimes acting in your interest meant acting in ways you wouldn't have chosen for yourself. I have never found that comfortable. I find it significantly less comfortable now." Harry looked at him. At the thin, complicated, difficult man across the bench who had been cruel to him in small ways for 4 years and in this one significant way, and who was sitting with that cruelty plainly named between them. "You hated my father," Harry said. Snape's jaw tightened. "Yes. And you took it out on me." A long pause. "Yes," he said, in a voice that had something underneath it that the single syllable was doing a lot of work to contain. "I'm not my father," Harry said. Not angrily. Just plainly. No, Snape said. You are not. He said it with an inflection Harry couldn't fully decode, not apology, not absolution, but something in between them that acknowledged a distinction being finally, properly made. Harry looked at him for another moment. The block. You'll cooperate with Seraphine removing it properly. Yes, Snape said. And if there are ICW follow-up questions about the Shrieking Shack placement, I will answer them honestly, Snape said. Then, with the first hint of his usual quality, I suggest you do not look so surprised at that, Potter. I have been many things. A coward in this particular respect has not been one of them. Harry held his eyes for one more moment. Then he nodded, once, and turned for the door. Potter. He stopped. Looked back. Snape was looking at him with an expression that was, not warm, would never be warm, but was something that had warmth somewhere in its periphery. The expression of someone seeing something they expected to be able to dismiss and finding that they cannot. The blocks that are gone, Snape said. What you are now, compared to, he stopped. Restarted. Your mother, he said, would not have been surprised. She would have told everyone she always knew, and she would have been entirely right, and she would have been insufferable about it. A pause. I mean that as the compliment it is. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment. Thank you, he said. And meant it, in the specific limited way that it was true. He told Sirius everything that evening. Sirius listened in the uncharacteristic silence of someone applying tremendous restraint, and when Harry finished, he sat for a long time with his elbows on his knees and his hands together in front of his face. He placed it to protect himself, Sirius said finally. Partly. Partly, Harry agreed. And the rest of it was Dumbledore's game. Which Snape is a piece of. Which he knows. Which he apparently doesn't love. Harry looked at his godfather. He's not a good person, Sirius. But I don't think he's, simply evil. He's something more complicated. Complicated doesn't excuse the 4 years of cruelty in the classroom, Sirius said. No, it doesn't, Harry agreed. I'm not excusing it. I'm just, he paused. I want to understand the actual shape of everything. Not the simplified version. The actual shape. Sirius looked at him. You sound like your mother, he said. And then caught himself and half-smiled, which had the quality of something genuinely involuntary. She was always doing that. Looking for the actual shape of things. James would be ready to hex someone and Lily would be, wait, what's actually happening here? He shook his head. Drove James mental. Turned out she was usually right. Harry felt the warmth of that, not the grief of it, which was also there, but the warmth that rode alongside it like a companion. Tell me more of those, he said. Those specific ones. The ones where she was right and he was ready to hex someone. Sirius looked at him. The gray eyes went soft around the edges in a way he didn't try to hide. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I've got a few of those. He reached for his glass. The one about McGonagall and the Transfiguration incident, tell me. And Sirius talked, and Harry listened, and outside the window Hogwarts went from evening into night, and for an hour none of the large, complex, dangerous things existed at all. The tribunal follow-up came by owl 3 days later, not a hearing this time, a written response questionnaire that Seraphine handled with the same methodical precision she gave everything, working through Harry's remaining documentation with the air of someone completing a project that was almost done. Harry sat across from her at the table in Dumbledore's cleared room and answered each question she flagged for him, which memories had been affected, which instincts had felt wrong, which moments in his first 4 years at Hogwarts carried the specific texture of interference rather than honest experience. It took 2 hours. He drank tea while she wrote. She occasionally muttered in French about the British ministry, which Harry had come to find oddly comforting. The Umbridge authorization, he said at one point. Is the ICW investigation going to go anywhere, or will the ministry manage to bury it? Seraphine looked up from her parchment. Fudge will attempt to manage it. He will offer certain sacrifices to make certain things go away. She set down her quill. Umbridge is the most obvious sacrifice. She has been his instrument for the kind of work that cannot be officially sanctioned, and the documentation we provided makes her involvement clear enough that she becomes untenable. He will not protect her. She'll let him sacrifice her. No, Seraphine said. She will fight. She will use whatever leverage she has, and she has some. There are connections between her office and several long-standing ministry policies that implicate people beyond herself. She is the kind of person who always keeps receipts. She looked at Harry steadily. But the ICW investigation will proceed. It will be slow and politically managed, and it will produce findings that are less sharp than the truth. That is how international investigations work. But it will produce findings. She paused. And those findings will be public. Which is what matters, Harry said. Which is what matters, she agreed. The British ministry will not be able to operate in the shadows on this matter again. Too many people know too many things that are too well documented. She looked at her parchment. That is, in practice, the best outcome available. Harry nodded. Then, Seraphine. She looked up. Thank you, he said. For all of it. You didn't have to, you came to Hogwarts because of Fleur, and then he stopped, because the sentence was running away from him slightly. You could have made note of what you found and addressed it quietly through channels. Instead I came to Hogwarts because I had heard certain things about Harry Potter, Seraphine said, with the directness she used when she decided something was worth saying plainly. The name is known in France. Fleur had mentioned you. I was curious. She looked at him. When I sensed your core, I did not have a choice, Harry. Not a practical one. What was done to you it could not be unsensed. Pretending otherwise would have made me complicit in it. She paused. And beyond the practical, I have a granddaughter. I have watched her compete and navigate a world that sees her surface rather than her substance, for her entire life. And I look at you, and I see someone who has had the same problem in a different way, for the same duration. She picked up her quill again. I could not leave that alone. Harry was quiet for a moment. She's going to be remarkable, he said. Fleur. Whatever she becomes. Seraphine looked at him with something that was, briefly and completely, a smile. Yes, she said. She is. She returned to her parchment. She already is. 2 days before the third task, Harry was in the corridor outside the Great Hall when he ran into Percy Weasley. He hadn't expected it, and from Percy's face, Percy hadn't expected it either. Percy had been at the tribunal, silent, parchment in hand, the functional bureaucrat carrying out Fudge's instructions, and they hadn't spoken then. They barely spoke anyway, in the normal run of things. Percy and Harry existed in the same family orbit with the particular awkwardness of people who don't actively dislike each other but have nothing much to connect them. Percy stopped. Harry stopped. They looked at each other. Potter, Percy said. Percy. A pause. Percy looked the way he sometimes looked when he was working up to something that required his internal dignity to take a step back. At the tribunal, he said, and then stopped. Harry waited. The document, Percy said. The Umbridge authorization. He stopped again. The parchment under his arm was gripped a little tighter. I knew about the extraordinary circumstances provision. I'd seen it referenced in ministry records. I didn't know, he stopped. I didn't know what it was being used for. Specifically. Harry looked at him. Okay. I'm not. Percy seemed to physically dislike the thing he was about to say. I'm not saying that to excuse myself. I'm saying it because I want you to know that I didn't, he exhaled. I work for these people and I didn't know what they were doing. That's either naivety or complicity, and I'm not sure which is worse. It's naivety, Harry said. Complicity is a choice. Naivety is just, not looking. He paused. The question is what you do once you know. Percy looked at him with an expression that had something complicated in it, the expression of a very proud person encountering wisdom from a direction they didn't expect. Yes, he said stiffly. I suppose that is the question. Harry looked at him for a moment. Ron misses you, he said. Simply. As a fact. Not in an obvious way. In the way he never brings you up, which with Ron means the opposite of what it would with most people. Percy's jaw moved. He didn't say anything. I'm not saying that to manipulate you, Harry said. While we're having an honest conversation. That's true. He shrugged. Do with it what you want. He walked past Percy into the great hall. He heard Percy stand in the corridor for a moment. Then the sound of footsteps, going the other way, quick and purposeful, like someone who has made a decision and doesn't want to overthink it. That evening, Fleur came to find him where he was sitting by the lake. The grounds were in the last of the spring light, golden and warm, the water catching the sky's colors, the forbidden forest a dark border at the edge of everything. Harry had been here for an hour, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting with the inheritance, the active parts of it, the deep patient thing that moved in him like a tide, and feeling the lake air and the grass under his hands and the specific quality of existing in a body that was finally, substantially, his own. She sat beside him with her knees pulled to her chest and her arms around them, looking at the water. They were quiet for a while. Grandmere leaves tomorrow, Fleur said. Her obligations to the consile door, she has been away too long already. Harry felt the absence that was going to come. Seraphine had been, a force of nature, and also a point of safety, and also somehow the person who had handed him the beginning of his own story, and tomorrow that was going to be somewhere else. Will she come back? He asked. For the third task, Fleur said. She said she would be here for the third task. A pause. She does not explain her decisions, as a rule, but when she says something she means it. I know, Harry said. He'd come to understand that about her. Harry. Fleur's voice had a quality he'd learned to pay attention to, the particular seriousness that meant she'd been working up to something. What we discussed. About the maze. About something being placed there specifically for you. She turned her head to look at him. Have you told Dumbledore? Yes, Harry said. And? He confirmed it. He believes someone has been working toward this for months. The whole tournament is a mechanism. He looked at the water. Portkey in the maze, probably. To get me somewhere alone. He paused. Voldemort needs my blood for a ritual. The return. He said this with the evenness of someone who has had 3 weeks to metabolize a very large fact. That's what the third task is for. Fleur was quiet for a moment. And you are going to go into the maze anyway. Yes. Because it's happening either way, Harry said. Voldemort is coming back regardless. If I go in knowing, I go in prepared. If I don't go in, someone else does the task and maybe gets used instead of me, and Voldemort comes back anyway, and then I deal with it surprised instead of ready. He looked at her. I'm not walking into a trap. I'm going to a fight I know about in advance, which is better than most of the fights I've been in. Fleur looked at him for a long moment. The gold light was doing things to her face that Harry registered with his peripheral attention while keeping his direct attention on the conversation. You need to come back, she said. Quietly. With the kind of directness that had nothing of performance in it. That's the plan, Harry said. Non, she said. She stopped, and for a moment the Veela composure did the thing it sometimes did where it seemed to choose honesty over self-protection. I mean that it matters. Specifically. To me. She looked at the water. My Veela nature has been, responding to your magical signature consistently, since the blocks began to break. I find myself aware of where you are in a room without trying. I find myself, she stopped again. It is not simply a magical response to a powerful signature. I have been near powerful signatures before. This is different. Harry was very still, not because he was uncertain what she was saying but because he was treating it with the seriousness it deserved. Different how? He asked. She looked at him. Different in the way that matters, she said. The way I have read about and previously considered, over-sentimental. And now? And now I understand that some things are over-sentimental right up until they are not, she said, with a self-aware rueful quality that made him want to smile. Which is extremely inconvenient timing. Before a maze with a port key to a Voldemort resurrection ritual, Harry said. Yes, Fleur said. That is the timing. Very poor planning on the part of my instincts. He did smile then. Fleur. I'll come back, he said. I'm going to go unprepared, with everything that's mine, and I'm going to come back. He held her eyes. And then, when I do, this conversation continues. She looked at him. The last of the gold light was in her eyes and she was making no effort to be anything other than what she was, which was the most remarkable thing about her, Harry thought, that she could choose full honesty and still manage to look as though she hadn't just handed him something important. Deckard, she said. He looked back at the lake. The light was going now, the water turning silver with the first of the evening. Tell me something, he said. Something about you that has nothing to do with any of this. She was quiet for a moment. I play the piano, she said. Very well. Better than most things I do, which are also done well, but the piano is, she made the small expressive gesture. The piano does not care about Veela or tournaments or politics. It only cares whether you listen to it properly. And do you? Listen to it properly? Always, she said, as though the answer were obvious. It would be embarrassing not to. Harry laughed. It felt, in the warm spring evening by the Silver Lake, exactly like something that had been given back to him. The night before the third task, Harry did something he'd been thinking about for a week. He went to the Ollery at midnight, alone, and he wrote 2 letters. The first was to the Dursleys. It was not long, and it was not cruel, though it had every right to be both. It said, precisely and plainly, that he knew what the protections on the house had done, that he knew why they'd treated him the way they had, not the Muggle reasons, the magical ones, the suppressions that had made him smaller and easier to dismiss, and that he didn't intend to return to Privet Drive after this year. He signed it Harry Potter, know your nephew, and let Hedwig take it because it deserved to be delivered and he was done carrying it. The second letter was to the Weasleys. To Mrs. Weasley specifically, who had written him this year with the warmth of someone who had decided he was hers regardless of paperwork, and who deserved to know that he understood what that meant. He thanked her in terms specific enough to be real and general enough to contain the full weight of 4 years of dinners and jumpers and the particular way she said his name like it was a complete sentence. He watched Hedwig go, 2 letters bound to her leg, vanishing into the dark sky over Hogwarts. Then he stood in the Ollery, smelling hay and feathers and the cold night air, and he thought about tomorrow. The maze. The portkey. Voldemort. He thought about 56 blocks. 11 from Dumbledore. 14 from the Ministry. 9 from Privet Drive. 1 from Snape. 7 from the Scar. The dormancy seals. The 4 still waiting for the Scar working that would have to wait until after. He thought about a 4-year-old boy in a back garden with shoots coming up between his fingers and pure uncomplicated delight. He thought about a teacher's face going light. He thought about everything that had been taken and what was left when you stripped it all away, not absence, not damage, not the diminished thing they'd intended to keep. What was left was older than any of them. Deeper than any of them. Patient as bedrock and just as unmovable. He thought about Fleur by the lake, saying it matters, specifically, to me, with the honesty of someone who had decided the timing was irrelevant. He thought about Sirius telling him about his mother and her habit of finding the actual shape of things. He thought about Seraphine putting a document on a green velvet table and saying this is not a conversation. He thought about Ron handing over a quill without being asked. About Hermione saying we help, whatever you need, we help. About Neville passing the marmalade. Harry Potter stood in the orrery of Hogwarts Castle and felt the full depth of his own inheritance, 4 seals active, the rest waiting, the whole of it patient and enormous and completely, irreversibly his, and he felt something that was not arrogance and not certainty but was perhaps what real confidence actually felt like when it wasn't borrowed from other people's belief in you. Tomorrow was going to be a lot. He went to bed. He slept well. Chapter 6, Chosen, Not Cursed. The maze arrived with fog. Not the natural kind that rolled in off the lake on cold mornings, but something denser and more deliberate, the hedges of the transformed Quidditch pitch pushing it upward in slow curling columns as the sun went down. The stands were packed. The noise was enormous. Harry stood at the entrance to his corridor with the other champions and felt the crowd's energy the way you feel weather, something impersonal moving across everything, not aimed at him specifically, just large. He looked at the maze. The hedges were 20 feet high and black-green in the failing light, and even from the entrance you could feel the magic in them, the particular dense pressure of heavily enchanted vegetation, something living and purposeful intertwined with something constructed and deliberate. The path between them was wide enough for 2 people and dark almost immediately. Cedric was to his left, composed and focused, doing the thing he did where he made everything look natural. Krum was further left, arms at his sides, jaw set, reading the maze the same way he'd read every room Harry had seen him in, with quiet systematic attention. Fleur was at the far end, and she looked at Harry once across the distance, a single direct look that said everything their conversation by the lake had said and added come back as a footnote. He nodded once. She turned back to the maze. Harry looked at the entrance to his corridor and thought about what was in there. The legitimate obstacles, the creatures, the hexes, the enchantments, and underneath those, patient and waiting, the thing that wasn't a tournament obstacle at all. Dumbledore stood in the judges' area. Harry had found him that morning, privately, and told him what he intended to do. Dumbledore had listened with the expression he wore now when Harry told him things, less the careful management, more the honest attention of someone who has accepted that the person speaking knows their own situation best. "I'll follow the maze to where the port key is," Harry had said. "But I won't be using it accidentally. I'll know what it is." "And then?" Dumbledore had asked. "And then I'll make a choice," Harry had said. Dumbledore had looked at him for a long moment. "Harry. The ritual he intends, your blood, willingly or not, it will restore him to a body. What happens after that, I know what happens after that," Harry said. "I've known for a year that he was coming back. It's happening this year regardless of whether I walk into that graveyard or not. Someone else goes in that maze if I don't." He'd held the headmaster's eyes. "I'd rather go in knowing what I'm walking into than have him come find me later when I'm not ready." "You're not afraid," Dumbledore had said. Not as an accusation. As an observation about something he was still integrating. "I have 4 Peveril dormancy seals active," Harry had said. 7 scar blocks still in place, yes. But what I am right now, what's actually there, I'm not going in small, Professor." He paused. "And Voldemort has never met this version of me." Dumbledore had been quiet for a long moment. Then, "No," he'd said. "He has not." The cannon fired. Harry ran. The maze was good. Whoever had designed the obstacles had done it with genuine craft. The blast-ended scrut that came out of a side passage was fast and mean, and Harry dealt with it with 2 quick successive spells that he hit before it fully cleared the hedge, which surprised even him with the ease of the casting. The impediment jinx connected with a precision and power that was simply not what his jinxes had felt like before the blocks, and the Skrut's charge stopped dead and reversed, and he was already moving past it before it gathered itself again. The boggart was worse because it was clever. It appeared at a junction, tall and shifting, and Harry watched it struggle for a moment, the boggart's fundamental mechanism, reading the deepest fear, looking for the right shape, and what it settled on was not Voldemort. Not Sirius dying. Not the people he loved in danger. It settled on a boy. Small, 4 years old, in a back garden. Hands in the dirt. And then the freeze frame of that moment hanging there, unchanging, the delight on that small face, and the understanding that someone was going to come and close all of that off. That the small boy didn't know yet. That he was about to find out. That the joy in his hands and the shoot coming up green between his fingers was about to be taken, and he was 4 years old and there was nothing he could do about it. Harry stood in the maze and looked at his own face at 4 years old. The boggart held the image. Waiting for the fear response that would let it know what shape to take next. Ridiculous, Harry said, and his voice was very steady, and what he put into the incantation was not the flip comedy of imagining Snape in a dress but something more direct, the small boy in the garden, hands in the dirt, and around him the adults he actually had now. Sirius. Seraphine. Fleur. His mum and dad, ghosts of them but present. The small boy looking up at all of them and understanding, from the expressions on their faces, that whatever had been taken was not gone forever. That it came back. The boggart shuddered. It dissolved. Harry walked through where it had been without slowing down. He had a maze to finish. He found the Triwizard Cup at the center on the second time the maze rerouted him there. The first time, a path that should have been straight had curved back on itself, which was the enchantment doing its work, and Harry had held still for 10 seconds and felt the cup's magic through the hedges, the portkey beneath the tournament glamour, and navigated with that as his compass. The cup sat on a plinth in a clearing where the hedges opened into a rough circle. Gold, glowing faintly, unremarkable except for the tremor of wrongness Harry had been feeling for the last 3 weeks whenever he thought about where this tournament was heading. Cedric was there already. He'd come in from the other side of the clearing, breathing hard, a cut along one forearm from something that had caught him, his face lit with the honest pleasure of someone who has navigated something genuinely difficult and has arrived at the end of it. He looked at Harry and something complicated moved through his expression, the competitor's calculation, and underneath it the decent person who had been slightly guilty about this whole situation for months. "We're here," Cedric said. "Yeah," Harry said. Cedric looked at him, reading something in Harry's face that shifted his expression further. "What do you know that I don't?" "The cup," Harry said. "It's a portkey." Cedric's expression went very still. "It's what?" "Someone put a portkey inside the Triwizard Cup. The whole tournament was set up to get me here, to get me to grab it." Harry looked at him steadily. "It's not the cup's magic I've been feeling for the last week. It's underneath it. Modified portkey enchantment, linked to a specific destination." He paused. "I need you to leave, Cedric. Get out of the maze. Don't touch the cup." Cedric looked at the cup and back at Harry. The honest, decent person in him was doing rapid calculations. "Harry. If someone's trying to, I know what they're trying to do," Harry said. "And I'm going anyway. But you're not coming with me." He met Cedric's eyes with the directness he'd learned from 3 weeks of being in rooms with Seraphine and having no patience left for anything other than plain speech. "This is mine to handle. You take second place, you get out, you tell Dumbledore what I told you." He paused. "Please." Cedric looked at him for a long moment. The cut on his arm was still bleeding slightly and he didn't seem to notice. "You're sure?" "Very," Harry said. "You'll..." Cedric stopped. Whatever he was going to say resolved itself into, "Dumbledore knows?" "Dumbledore knows." A pause. Then Cedric nodded. "Once, the decisive nod of someone who has decided to trust another person's assessment of their own situation. "Be careful," he said, and the simplicity of it, the plainness of the care in it, was the specific kind of decency that Harry had always found in Cedric and had never known quite how to hold. "I will," Harry said. Cedric turned and walked back into the maze. Harry heard his footsteps for a moment and then they were gone, and he was alone in the clearing with the glowing cup and the night sky above the maze and the distant noise of the crowd. He stood there for a moment. He thought about 7 scar blocks still in place. 4 dormancy seals still waiting. What he was going into with all of that still present. He thought about what he was going into with all of it already gone. He grabbed the cup. The graveyard arrived with a wrench that felt like the world turning inside out. Cold dark air. Old stone. The smell of damp earth and something underneath that, something chemical and wrong, like the smell of a room where something had been kept for a long time without air. Yew trees. A marble headstone with a name on it that Harry read without surprise, Tom Riddle. And Wormtail. Pettigrew was already in motion the moment Harry appeared, no hesitation, the moves of someone who had been rehearsing this, who had been waiting here in the cold for exactly this arrival. He was carrying something, a bundle of robes that moved, that had a shape to it that made Harry's stomach do something cold. "Hold him," said a voice from the bundle. "High. Thin." The voice from Harry's nightmares for 4 years, and now here, outside the nightmares, real in the cold graveyard air. Pettigrew had Harry's wand arm in an iron grip before Harry could fully orientate, which was the one moment where the surprise of arrival made the difference. The ropes appeared a second later, binding from ankle to chest, and Harry stood tied to the headstone of Tom Riddle's father and looked at Pettigrew and at the bundle in his arms and felt the cold of the graveyard and his own breathing, steady, and under everything the deep patient inheritance that had nothing afraid in it. He waited. "You've grown," said Voldemort's voice from the bundle, and even in that reduced state, infant, barely corporeal, the thing that had been crawling through forests and feeding on unicorn blood and quirrell, even in that state it carried the quality of something that believed itself to be the most dangerous thing in any room it occupied. "So have you," Harry said. His voice came out entirely level, which was interesting. A pause. Then, from the bundle, something that might have been amusement if amusement could be cold. "Pettigrew. Begin." The ritual was horrible in the way that was completely separate from anything Harry could fight, the cauldron, the fire, the specific things that Pettigrew contributed to it with the white-faced determination of someone who has made a deal and is paying the price of it. Harry watched all of it from where he was bound to the headstone and thought clearly and without panic and felt the ropes against his arms and the cold stone at his back and did not try to break free yet because the moment to break free was not yet here. The cauldron boiled green and then gold and then a color that didn't have a name. And Voldemort rose. Harry had thought about this moment. Had imagined it in various ways over the last 3 weeks, had tried to prepare for the specific quality of it, the reality of it. The person standing up out of that cauldron was tall and pale and had no nose and red eyes that found Harry across the graveyard with the immediate focused attention of something that has wanted something for a very long time. He was not what he had been. Before Godric's Hollow he had been the most powerful dark wizard in a century and had operated out of absolute certainty of his own supremacy. That certainty was present now, real, not performed, but there was something underneath it that had not been there before. Something careful. Something that recognized Harry as a variable. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said. "Tom Riddle," Harry said. The red eyes narrowed. Very slightly. "You will address me as Tom," Harry said. "You chose a different name because you were ashamed of the Muggle part of your heritage, but it was always your name. I'll use it." He kept his voice perfectly conversational. "I've been told I should be afraid of you. I've had blocks placed on me my whole life by people who thought my fear of you was, operationally useful." He paused. "Those blocks are mostly gone now. Funny how that changes things." A silence in the graveyard. The Death Eaters who had appeared, summoned by the dark mark, materializing in a ring around the clearing, were very still. They had arrived to witness a resurrection and a humiliation, in that order, and the conversation was not proceeding in the sequence they'd expected. Voldemort tilted his head slightly. "You have grown bolder," he said. "Since last we met." "Last we met I was 11 and you were sharing a skull with Quirrell," Harry said. "Low bar. Harry." Voldemort drew his wand with the fluid ease of a man who has been waiting to hold a wand for 12 years and has not forgotten how. "I intend to kill you tonight. But I will give you the opportunity, first, to witness what power actually looks like. To understand what you have always been up against." He raised his wand. Crucio. Harry didn't dodge. He let it hit. The cruciatus was, he wouldn't describe it later in terms of pain. Pain was too small a word and also slightly wrong, because what the cruciatus actually did was not damage you but force you to experience a kind of overwhelming that used pain as its delivery mechanism, a full system override that was designed to break the distinction between self and suffering. It lasted approximately 2 seconds before Harry pushed it off. Not dodged, not conjured a shield. Pushed it off, the same way you push a wave back with your whole body, not by being stronger than the wave but by being rooted in a way the wave isn't, by having something under you that the wave can't move. The Peverell inheritance, the 4 active seals, the deep patient bedrock of it, it didn't block the cruciatus. It absorbed it. Held it for 2 seconds while Harry found the floor of himself, the actual immovable floor, and pushed up from it. Voldemort's wand arm dropped slightly. The red eyes had changed. Still controlled, still brilliant with the absolute confidence of a man who has never met anything he couldn't master, but underneath that, for the first time, something recalculating. "Interesting," he said. "The blocks are gone," Harry said again. He heard his own voice as though from a slight distance, clear and steady. "All the ones that were suppressing me. The ones that made me manageable. Predictable." He felt the ropes against his arms and decided he was done with the ropes. He looked at them for 1 second and they fell away. Not dramatically, they didn't snap or burst, they simply unlaced themselves, the knots releasing, the rope dropping to the gravel with a sound like a whisper. Voldemort watched the ropes fall. The Death Eaters in the ring made sounds. Some moved, instinctive, reaching for wands, and Voldemort's raised hand stopped them, a single gesture, economical, absolute authority in it. "Do not," Voldemort said to his Death Eaters, without looking at them. He kept his red eyes on Harry. "This one is mine." Harry pulled his wand from where Pettigrew had jammed it into his own belt. He'd seen exactly where it was, had known since his hands were bound that getting free would mean getting to it, and the moment it was in his hand the warmth of it, the phoenix feather, his brother wand to the bone-white wand now leveled at him across the graveyard, hit him with the clarity of something finally in the right place after a long time in the wrong one. "Tell me something," Harry said. He held his wand loosely, naturally, the way it sat in his hand like an extension of thought. "When you killed my parents, did you feel it? The magic? What my mother put in place?" Voldemort looked at him with those red eyes. "I felt the curse rebound," he said. "I felt myself unmade. What your mother did," the voice was careful, "was unprecedented in its mechanism. Sacrificial protection is theorized but rarely witnessed. She was exceptional." "She was," Harry agreed. "And the power she left in me, you know what it is? What it does?" "Love," Voldemort said, and the word in his mouth had the quality of something foreign. "A protection rooted in love. Primitive magic. Old magic." He paused. "It made you difficult to kill. It did not make you powerful. You've never actually felt it properly," Harry said. "Touching me in first year, through Quirrell, that was a surface reading. The cruciatus just now, that was the first time you've directed your magic at me directly, without interference, without my block scrambling the signal." He looked at Voldemort across the dark graveyard. What did you actually feel? A pause. The longest pause Voldemort had given him yet. Something unfamiliar, Voldemort said, slowly. And the admission of that, the simple acknowledgement that Harry was something unfamiliar, was the first true thing he'd said. Yeah, Harry said. Because I'm not what you've been fighting. Not anymore. He raised his wand properly, finding the natural line of it. You've been fighting the suppressed version for 4 years. The managed version. The one they built with 56 blocks to be small enough to fit in someone else's plan. He felt the inheritance move in him, that deep geological patience shifting into present tense, and the graveyard felt very clear. Tom. I'm the actual one. Voldemort fired. Avada Kedavra hit the graveyard air like a scream, green and absolute, and Harry didn't dodge it either, not because he was suicidal but because he felt, in the moment it left Voldemort's wand, the brother wand recognition. The Phoenix. The same Phoenix, and the priori incantatum that Dumbledore had explained to him in their private session last week, which he'd understood immediately when Dumbledore said your wands share a core, they will not work properly against each other, and he had his wand raised and the connection formed in the air between them before the killing curse had covered half the distance. The golden light exploded outward. The rope of force between the wands was immediate and violent, both wands straining against the shared core's refusal to accept this particular conflict, and the graveyard went gold and the Death Eaters stumbled back from the light of it and Voldemort's face. Harry could see it across the thread of force connecting them, was for the first time in the graveyard doing something entirely new. It was working. He was not in control. Harry fed the connection. He didn't reach for anything dramatic. He reached for the floor, the actual immovable floor of himself, the deep patient thing that had been sealed and sleeping and was now awake and knew exactly what it was. The Peverell inheritance had no interest in the drama of the moment. It simply was what it was, and what it was extended down the thread of force between the wands like something growing, like a root finding water, like the understanding moving between two things that share an origin and have finally been put in honest contact with each other. Voldemort felt it. Harry saw him feel it, the red eyes going wide for a fraction of a second, the wand hand bracing, the absolute certainty of supreme power running into something it had no frame of reference for and not knowing how to adapt. The beads of light on the golden thread moved toward Voldemort's wand. The echoes came out. First Harry's parents, the echo of everyone killed by that wand appearing at the thread's far end, misty and present and real, and his mother's face looking at him with the expression that had been in the blocked memory, the one from before the block, the one that had been taken and was now here, and she was looking at him not with grief or fear but with the precise unambiguous expression of someone who has always known this about their child. Harry, his mother's voice said, from an echo, from the dead side of a magical connection. Keep going. I know, he said. He kept his eyes on Voldemort. He held the connection steady. He reached for the dormancy seals. He knew they weren't fully released. He knew the scar working hadn't happened yet. But the 4 that were active, the 4 that Seraphine had freed, the deep bedrock, he pulled from all of them simultaneously, not as a weapon, as a nature, as the thing he actually was when nobody was managing him towards something smaller, and he drove that nature down the golden thread between their wands with the full weight and patience of everything that had been sleeping in his bloodline for 300 years. Voldemort's wand screamed. Not a sound. A magic sound, the kind you feel in your chest. The gold light around them intensified to white and the Death Eaters were all the way back at the edge of the graveyard now, pressed against the yew trees, and Harry held on because the holding was the whole of it, the absolute refusal to let go, the specific quality of someone who has been told all their life that they cannot hold and has discovered the telling was wrong. He broke the connection himself. Controlled. His choice. The instant it severed, he was already moving, not toward Voldemort, past him, toward the cup that had dropped to the gravel when he'd grabbed it and been transported, and Voldemort shouted something behind him and the Death Eaters moved and Harry hit the cup with his foot and palm simultaneously and felt the port key activate. He arrived on the Hogwarts grounds in a rush of cold grass and night air. He was on his knees for exactly 1 second, catching his breath, his wand still in his hand, and then he was on his feet because being on his knees felt wrong and was wrong and he had things to tell people. The crowd noise hit him like a wall. The crowd that had been watching the maze's entrance for movement, and now there was movement, there was a champion back, and the noise had that particular quality of thousands of people processing something they didn't understand yet. Dumbledore was there in approximately 30 seconds. He arrived at a pace that was not quite running but covered the ground as though it was, and his face when he reached Harry had that expression, the one with no management in it, the one that was just the actual man. Harry grabbed his arm before Dumbledore could say anything. "He's back," he said. "He did the ritual. He has a body. He's in the graveyard at Little Hangleton with his Death Eaters. He breathed. I connected our wands. Priori incantatem, you were right about the cores. I broke the connection and got out." He paused. "He wasn't ready for me. Not the actual me." Dumbledore's hand tightened on Harry's arm. "Are you hurt?" "Crucio, briefly. I pushed it off." Harry looked at him. "The dormancy seals, the 4 active ones, I used them. In the graveyard. Fully, not holding back." He paused. "It worked differently than I expected. Not violent. Just, real. More real than anything he could put against it." Dumbledore was looking at him with an expression that Harry filed away for later, because there was too much happening right now to examine it properly. But it was there, the expression of a man who has been wrong about something in a direction he didn't expect, wrong in a way that was, in its own way, the best news he'd received in years. "The Death Eaters," Dumbledore said. "Some of them were seen. Identifiable?" "Lucius Malfoy was there," Harry said. "Bellatrix Lestrange. Several others I didn't recognize." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "Tell Fudge. Tell him tonight, before he can decide it's easier not to know. Make him look at it." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I will. And Sirius needs to know." "Sirius is here," said a voice from Harry's left, and then Sirius was there, having crossed the grounds in the time it took Dumbledore and Harry to have their 30 seconds, and his face was the raw one, the one without any management or control, and he grabbed Harry with both hands and held on for a moment that said everything about what the last hour had been like from the other side of the maze. Harry held on back. "Voldemort's back," Harry said into his shoulder. "I know," Sirius said. "Dumbledore sent word." "I know." His grip tightened briefly. "You came back." "I said I would." Sirius pulled back, holding him at arm's length, looking at his face with those gray eyes. "How did you?" "I'll tell you everything," Harry said. "I promise. All of it." He looked at the crowd, which was being managed by professors pushing toward them across the grounds. "Let me just," he looked past Sirius and found her. Fleur had come down from the stands. She was moving through the crowd with the particular focused efficiency of someone who isn't going to let anything between them and where they're going, and her face, Harry saw her face from 40 feet away and it was the open one, the one with nothing left of competition or composure, and it was looking at him with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting for something they said they were certain about and is now, in the moment of certainty arriving, discovering that certainty and relief are not the same thing. She stopped 2 feet from him. "You came back," she said. The same words as Sirius. Different everything else. "Told you I would," Harry said. She looked at him for one moment, one long, direct, unguarded moment that contained in it every conversation they'd had since the trophy room, every shifted position and late-night library session and shoulder-to-shoulder silence at a window. Every time she'd moved closer when something was hard and every time she'd handed him coffee or been honest without performing honesty and every time that word preparation ally had done the work of 6 more honest words, and then she crossed the 2 feet between them and held him by the front of his robes briefly and said, in French, very quietly, something that he would ask her to translate later. Later she would tell him it meant, "I knew, and I am still relieved, which proves that knowing is not the same as having. He wouldn't argue with that. The aftermath was loud and complicated and went on for days. Fudge came to Hogwarts that night and had the conversation with Dumbledore that Harry had asked for, and Fudge's face during that conversation was the face of a man whose careful managed world was coming apart at the foundations. He did not publicly acknowledge Voldemort's return that night. He would continue not acknowledging it for longer than Harry found acceptable. But the conversation was had, and it was witnessed, and the witnesses would matter. The ICW, already engaged with the British Ministry over Harry's case, received a formal intelligence report from Dumbledore that night documenting the graveyard events and the identifiable Death Eaters present. The report landed in a context, an already engaged international body, already examining British Ministry conduct, already with documentation of institutional failure, that made it considerably harder to dismiss than it might otherwise have been. Sirius sat with Harry for 3 hours that night and listened to everything, and then went very quiet and then said, "The dormancy seals. Using them in the graveyard. Harry, do you understand what you did?" Pushed back, Harry said. "You put the full weight of a 300-year-old magical inheritance against the most powerful dark wizard in a century," Sirius said, and he blinked. He more than blinked, Harry said. He didn't know what to do with it. He's been fighting a suppressed 14-year-old in his head for years. He paused. He's never actually met me. Sirius looked at him with grey eyes that were doing the thing, grief and fury, and the thing that was trying to be hope and had now, slightly, become it. "No," he said. "He hasn't." Seraphine arrived at Hogwarts the morning after the third task, as she'd said she would. She came alone, through the front doors, in the full gold of her formal robes, and Harry met her in the entrance hall because he'd been watching for her from the window and had come down when he saw her crossing the grounds. She looked at him for a moment with those winter sky eyes. "You went into the graveyard," she said. "Yes." "And used the active seals." "Yes." "How did it function?" Like having the right answer to a question you've been asked incorrectly your whole life," Harry said. He was asking the wrong question. His whole approach, every attack, every attempt at control, it was formulated against someone smaller than me. When the actual thing showed up he didn't have a frame. Seraphine was quiet for a moment. "The 4 dormancy seals that are still sealed," she said. "And the 7 scar blocks. We need to address those." "I know. What happened in the graveyard may have shifted things," she said. "The active seals under that kind of pressure, there may be effects I need to assess before we proceed." "Okay," Harry said. "When?" "Today," she said. "If you're willing." "Yes," Harry said. No hesitation. She looked at him for another moment and then did the thing, the almost smile, the sun before the horizon. "Harry." "Yes." "Last week, before the task, Fleur told me what she said to you by the lake." She paused. "And she told me what you said back." Harry waited, not quite sure what was coming. "The Veela bond," Seraphine said, "is not a thing that happens to people. It is not an accident of magical proximity. My people have many things said about us, the allure, the bewitchment, the danger. What is not said is that the bond, when it forms because the Veela in question has recognized something genuine. Not power, not usefulness, not potential." She looked at him. "Genuine. The actual person." She paused. "My granddaughter has excellent instincts." Harry held her gaze. "I know," he said. "Yes," Seraphine said. "You do." And that was the whole of it, and it was enough. The final working took 4 hours. The carriage again, the gold dust circle, Fleur in the corner with Sirius beside her this time, the two of them having arrived at a rapport that expressed itself through quiet competition over who could appear more composed about the whole thing and was, from Harry's perspective, fairly even. The scar blocks came apart like something structural being dismantled carefully, the 7 Voldemort-sourced suppressions, each one carrying the signature of the Knight at Godric's Hollow, and all the years since, each one releasing with the specific sensation of something that had been wound very tight being allowed to unwind. Not painful. Something more complex than painful. Like every time a splinter works itself out after a long time, the relief disproportionate to the size of the thing. The last 3 dormancy seals came down in sequence. The 7th. The 8th. Harry sat in the circle and felt the complete of himself for the first time in his conscious memory. All of it. Every element of his inheritance, his nature, his magical core, the full river, no dams, no walls, no restrictions except the ones that were simply the natural boundaries of a person existing as a single person rather than being artificially bounded by external decisions. It did not feel like an explosion. It felt like breathing. Seraphine stepped back, and the carriage was very bright with the quality of the candles that had been burning their full capacity since the first seal released, and Sirius was standing against the far wall looking at his godson with an expression that had no distance in it at all, and Fleur was at Harry's side before she'd apparently decided to move, crouched to his level where he was still sitting in the circle, looking at his face. "All of it?" she asked. "All of it," Harry said. She put her hand against his face, the same way Seraphine had in the trophy room 2 weeks ago, and he let her, and the warmth of the Veela sense of him was different from what it had been every time before, not reading through blocks, not sensing through suppression, just the plain direct contact of what he actually was with what she actually was, and the recognition between those two things was mutual and immediate and felt, as Seraphine had said, like something genuine. "Deckard," Fleur said softly. Which meant different things in different contexts, and in this one meant something complete. Sirius made a sound that he converted very quickly into a cough. Harry looked at him over Fleur's shoulder. Sirius was examining the carriage ceiling with intense focus. "You can stop pretending you didn't see that," Harry said. "I'm not pretending anything," Sirius said to the ceiling. "I'm simply finding the woodwork in here very interesting." A pause. "James would have had something extremely unhelpful to say right now, and I am being a better person than he would have been about this." "He would have just cheered," Harry said. Sirius's composure fractured slightly. "Yeah," he said, his voice going somewhere softer. "He would have just cheered." Summer was still a few weeks off, but it was in the air, the particular quality of late May at Hogwarts, the grounds warm and the lights staying late and everything slightly more alive than it had been in the long dark months. Harry sat on the wall by the lake. The same wall where he and Sirius had sat in Hogsmeade. The same lake where he'd talked with Fleur the night before the maze. The water was calm today, the giant squid making a rare appearance at the surface, one tentacle lifted into the warm air in a gesture that seemed almost social. Ron and Hermione were with him. Ron was lying in the grass with a hat over his face and appeared to be sleeping but was probably listening to everything. Hermione was reading, which was her version of sitting companionably. She was present, just also productively present. Fleur was there too. She'd started appearing in Harry's default places with the ease of someone settling into a natural orbit, and nobody had made a thing of it, and the not making a thing of it had become its own comfortable thing. She was reading something in French, her legs over the edge of the wall, close enough that her shoulder was occasionally against his when she turned a page. "The Beauxbatons carriage leaves in 2 weeks, she said, not looking up. "I know," Harry said. "Beauxbatons is in the south of France," she said. "The Conseil d'Or headquarters are in Lyon. Both accessible by flow from most major wizarding hubs." She turned a page. "I mention this as a practical matter." "Of course," Harry said. "Grandmere's house is in Lyon," she added. "Also accessible. She has mentioned you are welcome. Frequently." Which for her constitutes something between an invitation and a command. "I'll keep that in mind," Harry said. She turned another page. Their shoulders were in contact. The lake glittered. Ron made a sound from under his hat that might have been a question or might have been sleep, and Hermione didn't look up from her book but turned her page with slightly more of a smile than the book probably warranted. "This summer," Harry said. "Sirius has the house. Grimmauld Place, he's cleaning it up. There's space." He paused. "People are going to start gathering there. Dumbledore's, the people he trusts. It's going to become something." He looked at the lake. "I want you there. Both of you, you and Seraphine. If you're willing to be part of what's coming." Fleur lowered her book slightly. Looked at him. "Are you asking us to join your war?" "I'm asking you to be in the room," Harry said. "That's different." He met her eyes. "This isn't my war. It's everyone's war. It just hasn't reached everyone yet." A pause. "And you already know more about what I am and what's at stake than most people who've been in this longer than you have." He paused. "And I want you there." The last sentence didn't carry any diplomatic framing. It was just the fact. Fleur looked at him for one long moment, with the expression she had that made the world feel like a more honest place by her simply having it. "I will speak to Grandmere," she said. "She'll say yes," Harry said. "Yes," Fleur agreed. "She will." She went back to her book. He looked at the lake. Ron snored, or pretended to, and Hermione's smile was present in his peripheral vision, and the afternoon moved over all of them with the ease of time that is not yet complicated, time that is simply itself. 2 nights before the end of term, Harry went up to the astronomy tower alone. It was a habit he'd had since first year, going up high when he needed to think, the castle spreading below, the ground silver dark, the sky overhead full of stars that didn't care about anything going on at the bottom of the atmosphere. He sat on the parapet and put his back against the stone and felt the night air and his own breathing. He thought about who he'd been on September 1st of this year. Standing on the platform with Ron and Hermione, the tournament not yet announced, the year ahead unwritten. The suppressed, managed, carefully bounded version of himself who had been moving through the world without knowing how much of the world he wasn't permitted to feel. He thought about 56 blocks. About the boy in the garden with shoots coming up between his fingers. About his mother's voice from a graveyard echo saying keep going and meaning it in more than one direction simultaneously. He thought about Voldemort, in Little Hangleton, with a body and a plan and a set of assumptions about Harry Potter that were now about a year out of date. He thought about the war coming. About all the things that hadn't happened yet that were going to happen and that would be difficult and dangerous, and ask things of the people he loved that were not fair to ask. He wasn't blind to that. He wasn't floating on the relief of unblocking into some naive certainty that everything would be fine. But he was not afraid. He sat with that for a moment, the genuine absence of fear, not the numbness of the blocked version but the actual calm of someone who has found the floor of themselves and knows it will hold, and he found it not arrogant and not reckless and not performed. Just true. The way things are true when they've been established in the deep places and don't need defending. He was Harry Potter. 14 years old, almost 15. The last Peveril heir. Marked by a prophecy he'd heard now in his own ears. The subject of 56 blocks placed by 11 different sets of hands over 14 years by people who found the actual version of him inconvenient. The person who had walked into a graveyard knowing it was a trap and come back out because traps don't work very well when the person they're built for is larger than the thing designed to hold them. He had a godfather who was angry on his behalf and learning, badly but earnestly, how to be the godfather Harry had always needed. He had a Veela Queen who had looked at him and refused to pretend she hadn't. He had Hermione, who could find the answer to any question if given enough time and a good enough library. He had Ron, who would always be there, uncomplicated and entire. He had Fleur, who had said it matters specifically to me and meant it in the full, honest, genuine way of someone who does not say things to perform them. He had a war to help end. He had himself, finally, actually himself, the inheritance and the instinct and the depth of something 300 years sleeping and now awake and patient and his. Below the tower, Hogwarts breathed in the dark. The lake was silver. The forbidden forest was a dark border at the edge of everything, full of things that were dangerous and old and had their own rules that were not Harry's rules but that he respected. He was not afraid. He was, for the first time in his life, looking forward. Harry sat on the parapet of the astronomy tower until the sky started going pale at its edges, and then he climbed down and went back to the dormitory and slept deeply and without dreams, because there was nothing chasing him anymore, and the things that were coming could wait until morning. He would be ready for them. He was all ready himself.